The world did not end with a sudden crack of thunder, but with the quiet, final click of a front door closing in the early morning light. Before the heavy machinery of history began to turn, there was only the gentle, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in a quiet hallway. It was a time of golden afternoons and fading summer warmth, when the dust motes danced lazily in the sunbeams that stretched across the worn floorboards of 1,000 different homes. The world was still small then. It was measured in the distance from the front porch to the corner store, in the familiar path through the woods behind the house, and in the comfortable, worn grooves of a life lived entirely in peace. If you were to look closely at those final days of innocence, you would not see grand speeches or maps spread across wide tables. You would see a mother, standing in her kitchen, her hands dusted with white flour. The kitchen was the heart of the world, warm and smelling of yeast, roasting apples, and old wood. She is kneading dough, pressing into it all the words she cannot bring herself to say. She wipes her hands on a linen apron and turns to look at her son, who sits at the wooden table. He is dressed in clothes that suddenly seem too large, too heavy, too strange for the boy who used to track mud across her clean floors. She memorizes the soft lines of his face, the way his hair falls across his forehead, trying to freeze this single, fragile second in the amber of her memory. Across the sea, 1,000 miles away, another mother in another kitchen is doing the exact same thing. Her kitchen smells of strong coffee and simmering broth, but the silence hanging in the air is identical. In these quiet rooms, there are no borders, no nations, no enemies. There is only the universal, aching tenderness of a parent looking at a child who is about to step out into the vast, unknown dark. Upstairs, the act of packing is a slow, deliberate ritual. A canvas duffel bag or a small, scuffed leather suitcase lies open on a neatly made bed. The items going inside are not weapons of war, but the fragile anchors of home. A pair of thick woolen socks, knitted by an ant by the light of a fireplace. A small, tin box of sweet hard candies, meant to be saved for a difficult day. A fountain pen, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. And photographs. Always photographs. A sweetheart with a shy, radiant smile, captured forever in black and white. A family standing awkwardly in their Sunday best on the front lawn. These small squares of paper are tucked into breast pockets, pressed close to the heart, carrying the impossible weight of everything left behind. In the corner of the room, a father stands. He does not know what to say. He clears his throat, staring out the window at the familiar street, watching the wind rustle the leaves of the oak tree he planted when his son was born. He turns and offers a small, quiet token, a silver pocket watch, a compass, or perhaps just a steady, calloused hand resting heavily on a young shoulder. In that single touch, there is a silent transfer of strength, a desperate, unspoken prayer for safekeeping. The fathers know the world is harsh, and they are handing over their boys to a storm they cannot protect them from. When the morning of departure finally arrives, it brings with it a cool, pale light. The air is crisp, biting at the cheeks, smelling of damp earth and falling leaves. The walk to the railway station is a journey through a ghost town, even if the streets are full. The cobblestones echo with the sound of heavy boots. A neighbor sweeps their front step, pausing to offer a solemn, silent nod. A stray dog watches from the corner. The baker is pulling fresh bread from the oven, and the warm, comforting scent spills out into the street, a cruel reminder of the comfort they are walking away from. Everything is exactly as it has always been, yet nothing will ever be the same again. The railway station is a cathedral of steam and shadows. It is a kaleidoscope of wool coats, hats, and nervous eyes. The great iron roof traps the hiss of the engines and the low, murmuring hum of 1,000 private farewells. The air smells of coal smoke, damp wool, and the faint, sweet perfume of girls clinging to the necks of young men. Here, on the crowded platform, the brave faces finally begin to crack. The false, cheerful promises of a quick return fade into the mist. Mothers bury their faces in the scratchy wool of their sons' coats, breathing in the scent of them one last time. Fathers pull their boys into tight, awkward embraces, their eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. Sweethearts whisper promises into ears, their hands trembling as they trace the jawlines of the men they love, trying to commit the feeling of their skin to memory. There is a profound, shared vulnerability in this space. No one is a soldier yet. They are just boys. Some are farm hands who have never left their county. Some are students with ink still staining their fingers. Some are clerks who simply closed their ledgers and walked out the door. They stand awkwardly in their new boots, carrying their small bags, looking back at the families who have formed a human wall of love and grief along the edge of the platform. Then comes the whistle. It is a long, mournful sound that cuts through the hum of the crowd, echoing off the stone walls and drifting up into the gray sky. It is the sound of time running out. The boarding begins. It is a slow, shuffling procession up the metal steps and into the narrow, wooden corridors of the train carriages. The doors slide shut with a heavy, final thud. The boys press their faces against the cold glass of the windows. Outside, the platform is a sea of raised hands, waving frantically, desperately. With a deep, shuddering groan, the train begins to move. The hiss of the steam grows louder, the iron wheels biting into the tracks. The movement is agonizingly slow at first. A young man reaches down, sliding the top of the window open just enough to let his fingers brush against the outstretched hand of his mother running alongside the train. For one fleeting second, their fingertips meet, skin against skin, and then the train pulls away, gathering speed. The hand slips away. From inside the carriage, the faces on the platform begin to blur. The waving hands become small, pale dots against the dark coats, shrinking into the distance until they are swallowed entirely by the curling white steam and the morning fog. Inside the train, the silence settles heavily. The rhythmic clack-clack, clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks becomes the only sound, a steady, hypnotic heartbeat carrying them away. The young men find their seats. They stow their bags overhead. They sit down, smoothing the wrinkles in their stiff new trousers, not quite knowing where to look. They are strangers to one another, thrown together by the great, invisible currents of the world. In the corner, a boy from the city offers a cigarette to a quiet young man from the mountains. A match is struck, the small, warm flare of the flame illuminating their faces for a brief moment in the dim light of the carriage. They do not speak. They only nod, sharing the smoke and the quiet understanding that they are all drifting in the exact same boat. Across the aisle, a young man reaches into his pocket and pulls out a folded piece of paper. It is a letter, shoved into his coat by his father just before he boarded. He opens it slowly, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The handwriting is familiar, shaky, and full of a love so deep it makes his throat ache. He reads it in the fading light of the afternoon, the words blurring as the landscape tears past the window. Outside, the familiar hills and valleys of home give way to foreign fields. The colors of the afternoon begin to soften, melting into the bruised purples and deep blues of twilight. The sun dips below the horizon, pulling the long shadows across the earth. The farmhouses they pass become small, isolated pinpricks of warm, yellow light in the gathering dark. Inside those houses, they know, families are sitting down to dinner, leaving one chair empty. The rocking of the train is strangely comforting, like a cradle moving through the night. The boys lean their heads against the rattling glass. Some close their eyes, listening to the hum of the steel. Some stare out into the blackness, watching the reflection of their own faces ghosting over the glass, superimposed over the passing trees. They are carrying the memory of a mother's kitchen, the scent of fresh bread, the weight of a father's hand, and the soft whisper of a sweetheart's promise. They wrap these memories around themselves like blankets in the cold carriage. The light of the world they knew is fading, slipping quietly behind the horizon. Ahead of them lies only the vast, deep night, and the endless, rolling tracks leading into the dark. But inside, in the quiet, gentle rhythm of the train, they breathe together, united in their fears, their hopes, and the lingering, beautiful echoes of the homes they have left behind. The first frost did not announce itself with the roar of thunder, but with the quiet, delicate crystallization of a single breath in the midnight air. Autumn had slipped away while the world was looking the other way, taking with it the golden leaves and the gentle rains, leaving behind a landscape stripped bare and waiting. The earth, which had been soft and yielding, slowly turned to iron. The mud in the tracks hardened into jagged ridges, and the puddles glazed over with fragile, opaque panes of ice. It happened so quietly, this change of the season. For the young men far from home, wrapped in coats that suddenly felt much too thin, the arrival of winter was a profound and silent shock. For most of their lives, winter had been a familiar friend. It was the season of hearth fires and heavy quilts, of the sweet smell of roasted chestnuts and the laughter of children tumbling in the snow. It meant coming inside with rosy cheeks to a kitchen warm with the scent of cinnamon and baking bread. But here, in the vast and unfamiliar expanses of the world, winter wore a different face. It was an ocean of white and gray, a vast and different emptiness that stretched out to the horizon, making everything feel impossibly distant. If you were to walk softly through these frozen woods, you would see young men learning the harsh, quiet lessons of the cold. You would see a boy, no older than 19, sitting in a shallow dugout. He is blowing gently into his cupped hands, trying to coax life back into his numb fingers. His breath blooms like a small, white cloud in the freezing air, lingering for a moment before vanishing into the pines. He fumbles with the stiff brass buttons of his tunic, his movements slow and clumsy. Beside him, a comrade is carefully wrapping a torn burlap sack around his boots, tying it with a piece of twine, a humble attempt to keep the biting chill from seeping through the leather. They do not speak. The cold has a way of stealing words, of making the effort of conversation seem too great. Instead, there is only the sound of shivering, the rustle of stiff fabric, and the occasional, sharp crack of a frozen branch breaking under the weight of the wind. Yet, across this frozen landscape, across the quiet, snow-dusted fields and the lines that divide the world, the exact same scene is unfolding in the fading light. Just a few hundred yards away, beneath the same pale and bruised sky, another young man sits in the snow. He wears a different uniform, and he dreams in a different language, but his shoulders hunch against the wind in exactly the same way. He holds a tin mug of coffee that lost its warmth an hour ago, staring down at the dark, freezing liquid. Frost has settled on his eyelashes, catching the faint glint of the moon. He pulls his collar up around his ears, tucking his chin into his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible against the vastness of the chill. In this frozen silence, the grand sweeping movements of nations fade away completely. The cold does not recognize borders. It does not read maps, and it does not wear a uniform. It is a quiet, impartial blanket that falls over everyone equally, uniting friend and foe in the simple, desperate human need to just stay warm. As the deep blue of twilight settles over the forests, the snow begins to fall. It does not come as a storm, but as a gentle, whispered dusting. The flakes drift down like tiny feathers, catching in the branches of the evergreen trees, settling silently onto the shoulders of the men on watch. It is a mesmerizing, hypnotic sight. The snow covers the harsh edges of the world. It fills in the jagged holes in the earth, burying the scars of the year beneath a layer of pure, untouched white. For a few fleeting hours, the landscape is transformed into a scene of breathtaking, quiet beauty. A sentry stands at his post, his rifle resting heavy in his arms, and watches the snow falling through the beam of a distant light. As he stares into the swirling white, the world around him seems to dissolve. The snow looks exactly like the snow that used to fall on the hills behind his childhood home. He closes his eyes, and for a moment, he is not a soldier standing in the freezing dark. He is a boy again, pulling a wooden sled up a steep, white hill, his lungs burning with cold, clean air, his little sister laughing beside him. He can almost hear the soft, muffled chime of church bells in the village valley, and he can almost see the warm, yellow glow of his mother's kitchen window beckoning him home out of the dark. This homesickness is not a sharp pain, but a deep, hollow ache, born from the simple beauty of the falling snow. It is a quiet reminder of everything gentle and good in the world, suspended there in the freezing air. To survive the long, dark hours, the men turn inward, to the small, fragile tokens of the lives they left behind. A flashlight is clicked on, its weak yellow beam shielded by a woolen blanket. Beneath this makeshift tent, a young man pulls a letter from his chest pocket. The paper is brittle from the cold, and he unfolds it with infinite care, as if it were made of spun glass. It is a letter from his mother. She writes about the first snowfall back home, about how she has put an extra quilt on his empty bed, just in case he returns in the night. She tells him that the dog still sleeps by the front door, waiting for his footsteps. As he reads the familiar, looping handwriting, a profound warmth spreads through his chest. It is a warmth that the winter cannot touch. He traces the ink with his numb thumb, imagining his mother's hand moving across the page, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. When he has finished reading, he folds the paper along its well-worn creases and tucks it back inside his coat, pressing it close to his heart. The love penned on that page is a shield, a quiet ember burning steadily in the deep freeze of the night. When the deep night truly sets in, the temperature plummets, and the air grows so crisp it hurts to inhale. The world becomes a cathedral of ice and shadows. This is the time when the solitude becomes too heavy to bear alone, and the young men seek out the only true comfort left to them, each other. Beneath the skeletal branches of the trees, men huddle together in the dark. Rank and pride vanish completely in the face of the biting frost. They are just human beings, sharing their meager body heat, sitting shoulder to shoulder beneath thin, scratchy wool blankets. They lean against one another, their breathing falling into a steady, collective rhythm. In this shared closeness, there is a profound intimacy, a silent pact of survival. It is in these darkest, coldest hours that the smallest moments of kindness shine the brightest. A young man reaches into his pack and pulls out a single, precious square of chocolate, saved for weeks. He breaks it in half with a sharp crack that echoes in the stillness, and hands a piece to the shivering boy beside him. No words are exchanged, only a slow, grateful nod in the dark. A dry pair of knitted socks is passed from a seasoned older man to a young recruit whose feet are damp and freezing. A quiet voice begins to murmur, painting a picture of the meals they will eat when they finally return home. They whisper of hot bowls of thick stew, of potatoes roasted in the ashes of a fire, of fresh, crusty bread smothered in butter, and steaming mugs of sweet tea. They share these dreams like a banquet in the dark, chewing on the memories, letting the imagined steam warm their faces. As the hours stretch on, a strange, beautiful peace settles over the frozen world. The machinery of the era has grown too cold to turn. The engines are frozen silent, the metal too brittle to move. There is only the wind sighing through the pines, and the vast, indifferent majesty of the winter sky overhead. The clouds part, revealing a canopy of stars so bright and clear they look like shattered diamonds scattered across black velvet. The sentries from both sides, standing in their lonely vigils, look up at the exact same constellations. They watch the same moon cast its pale, silver light over the snowdrifts. In that profound, glittering silence, there are no armies. There are no flags, and there are no lines drawn in the earth. There are only young men, far from their mothers, lost together in the deep, quiet frost. They are wrapped in their memories, huddled against the chill, dreaming of a hearth they cannot see. And as they watch their breath rise and vanish into the starlight, they wait, patiently and together, for the slow, golden, and forgiving promise of the morning sun. The desert does not roar, it whispers, carrying the weight of 1,000,000 grains of sand across an endless, golden sea. If you were to stand in the center of that vast and sweeping expanse, you would find a silence so profound it rings in the ears. It is a landscape that stretches the very concept of forever, a sweeping canvas of pale ochre, burnt umber, and blinding, chalky white. For the young men who found themselves delivered to these shores, stepping off ships onto the baked earth, it was like waking up on the surface of another world. They were boys raised in the damp, emerald embrace of rolling valleys, boys who knew the comforting gloom of narrow cobblestone streets, the gentle patter of rain against a bedroom window, and the smell of wet soil in a mother's garden. Nothing in their young lives had prepared them for the sheer, overwhelming emptiness of the deep desert. Here, the horizon is not broken by church spires or the soft curves of familiar forests. It is a razor-straight line where the burning sky meets the baked earth, shivering and dancing in a permanent, shimmering haze. There are no roads, no signposts, no gentle streams winding through the valleys. There is only the wind, endlessly sculpting and resculpting the dunes, erasing footprints as quickly as they are made, keeping the desert's ancient secrets hidden beneath a veil of drifting dust. In this beautiful, terrible isolation, the sun is not the warm, welcoming friend of a childhood summer. It is a heavy, physical presence. From the moment it breaches the horizon, painting the dunes in fleeting, spectacular shades of rose and violet, it begins its steady, relentless climb, bearing down on the earth with an intense, unblinking stare. The heat rises in waves, wrapping around the men like a heavy woolen blanket, slowing their movements, softening their voices, and pressing them down into the sparse, shifting shade. Everything in the desert is touched by the sand. It is a fine, talcum-like powder that rides on the dry winds, finding its way into the folds of clothing, settling into the creases of tired eyes, and resting on the pages of open books. It coats the skin, turning every man, regardless of the uniform he wears or the language he speaks, into the exact same shade of pale, dusty earth. In the overwhelming scale of the desert, the differences between men seem vanishingly small. When a soldier wipes the grit from his brow, his gesture is identical to the man waiting miles away across the dunes. They are both simply human beings, fragile and small, trying to navigate a landscape that was never meant for them. The most precious thing in this world, more valuable than gold or ammunition, is water. It is measured out in careful, miserly drops. The canteens hanging heavily from their webbing are warm to the touch, the metal baked by the midday sun. When a young man unscrews the cap, he does not gulp. He lets the water rest on his cracked lips, tasting the faint, metallic tang of the tin, holding the warm liquid in his mouth for just a moment before letting it soothe his parched throat. In the meager shade of a canvas tent, propped up by wooden poles and flapping lazily in the sluggish breeze, a group of soldiers sits in a circle. In the center, a small, battered tin cup is being passed from hand to hand. It holds a ration of water, slightly flavored with a pinch of tea leaves or a squeeze of precious, bruised lemon. They share it with the quiet reverence of a sacred ritual. There is no greed here, no rushing. A young man with eyes the color of a stormy sea takes a small sip, then carefully hands the cup to his neighbor, a boy whose face is painted with freckles and sunburn. They nod to one another, united by the deep, resonant ache of a shared thirst. In that simple exchange of a dented tin cup, there is a profound and unspoken brotherhood, a gentle acknowledgement of their shared frailty beneath the scorching sky. When the sun reaches its zenith, the desert demands stillness. The world holds its breath. This is the time. When the mind wanders, fleeing the harsh reality of the dunes to seek refuge in the cool, shaded corridors of memory. A young man sits leaning against the wheel of a silent truck, seeking the small, geometric patch of shadow it casts upon the sand. He has his knees drawn up to his chest, acting as a makeshift desk. In his hands, he holds a crumpled piece of paper and a pencil worn down to a tiny stub. He is writing a letter home. As he writes, a drop of sweat falls from his chin, landing on the paper and blurring the ink of a single, tender word. He doesn't wipe it away. He simply traces the blurred blue edge with his dusty thumb, smiling softly to himself. He is writing to a sweetheart who lives in a town where the rain falls gentle and gray. He closes his eyes and tries to project himself across the thousands of miles of ocean. He imagines the feeling of wet grass beneath his bare feet. He pictures a wide, lazy river, its surface dimpled by falling raindrops, flowing under an old stone bridge. He writes about the smell of damp pine needles in the autumn, and the way the mist clings to the hills in the early morning. He writes of these things with a desperate, beautiful longing, trying to capture the essence of water and greenery and send it through the mail, hoping that perhaps, by writing about the cool rain, he might somehow feel it on his face. He reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out a photograph. It is a picture of a girl standing by a fountain, wearing a light cotton dress, her hair blowing across her smiling face. The photograph is worn at the edges, the paper soft from being handled 1,000 times. He gently brushes a grain of sand from her cheek. In the overwhelming heat, that small, faded square of paper is his anchor, his tether to a world that feels like a fading dream. And out there, across the shimmering waves of heat, another boy sits in the shade of a rocky outcropping, holding a different photograph. He wears a different helmet, and the words he writes on his paper are shaped differently, but the ache in his chest is an exact mirror. He, too, is dreaming of a lake surrounded by dark, cool mountains. He is remembering the icy shock of plunging into spring water, the sweet, crisp taste of an apple pulled straight from a branch in his grandfather's orchard. They are enemies on a map, but in their hearts, in the quiet, desperate sanctuary of their daydreams, they are identical. They are just boys, lost in the sand, wishing for the rain. As the long, agonizing hours of the afternoon finally begin to wane, the desert undergoes a miraculous transformation. The sun, which had been a tyrant all day, begins to soften, sinking lower in the sky and losing its blinding edge. The harsh, white light turns to a deep, liquid gold, washing over the dunes and casting long, graceful shadows that stretch out like dark fingers across the sand. The wind drops, and the world exhales. This is the hour of relief. The stifling heat begins to lift, rising up into the atmosphere, leaving behind a profound and gentle cooling. The young men emerge from their shaded hollows, stretching their stiff limbs, brushing the dust from their shoulders. They watch the horizon as the sky shifts from gold to a bruised, brilliant purple, and finally, to a deep, velvety indigo. With the setting of the sun, the desert reveals its final, startling secret. The heat of the day vanishes entirely, replaced by a crisp, biting chill. The sand, which had burned through the soles of their boots at noon, now grows cold to the touch. The young men who had been sweltering only hours before now reach for their heavy woolen sweaters and thick coats. They huddle together as the night settles in, drawing close to share the warmth of their bodies. Small, smokeless fires are lit, hidden deep in the trenches and hollows of the dunes. Tiny tin stoves hiss quietly, heating precious cups of dark, bitter coffee or strong tea. The smell of the warm brew drifts on the cool night air, a scent of home and comfort in the middle of nowhere. Men sit in tight circles, their faces illuminated by the soft, orange glow of the embers. They speak in hushed, murmuring voices, their tones instinctively lowered by the immense silence of the surrounding dark. They talk of simple things. They do not speak of the grand movements of armies or the politics of the world. They speak of the meals they miss, debating the proper way to roast a chicken or the best filling for a pie. They trade stories of their hometowns, of stubborn old dogs, of bicycles ridden down steep hills, and of the girls who are waiting for them. In the dark, their voices weave together, creating a tapestry of ordinary, beautiful human life, a gentle rebellion against the vast emptiness that surrounds them. When the conversation eventually lulls, they lean back and look up. Away from the lights of the cities, away from the smoke and the haze of the familiar world, the desert sky is a revelation. It is an ocean of stars, so thick and bright they look like powdered sugar spilled across black silk. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, a glowing, celestial river pouring through the night. A young sentry stands at the edge of the camp, his collar turned up against the cold. He leans on his rifle and tilts his head back, lost in the breathtaking beauty of the cosmos. He searches for the familiar constellations, the same patterns of stars that hang over his mother's house. He finds them, shining steadily in the dark, and a deep, comforting peace washes over him. He knows that miles away, the unseen enemy is looking up at the exact same sky. He knows that they are shivering in the exact same cold, brewing the same tea, and dreaming the exact same dreams of green fields and cool rivers. The stars do not take sides. They simply shine, offering their quiet, distant light to anyone who looks up. The desert night deepens, wrapping the world in a profound and gentle stillness. The wind whispers softly across the dunes, a slow, rhythmic lullaby moving the sand grain by grain. The young men curl up in their blankets, pulling their coats tight around their shoulders, pressing their photographs close to their chests. They close their eyes, letting the memory of the rain wash over them, and under the vast, impartial canopy of the glowing sky, they finally drift into a quiet, shared sleep. The sea does not keep time by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow, eternal breathing of the tides. To leave the shore behind is to leave the familiar anchors of the world. The solid earth, the rustling leaves of oak trees, the warm, golden lights of a harbor town, they all blur and fade, swallowed by a thick, gray mist, until there is nothing left but the endless, rolling expanse of the Atlantic. Out here, the world is painted only in shades of slate, silver, and the deep, bruised blue of the open water. For the young men sailing upon it, the ocean became their entire universe, a vast and lonely frontier that hummed with a quiet, isolated magic. Up on the surface, aboard the merchant ships and the small escorts that formed the slow, plodding convoys, life was measured by the hypnotic, rhythmic sway of the deck. The horizon was an unbroken line, a perfect circle that trapped them in the center of an endless sky. If you were to stand on the deck of one of these freighters during the midnight watch, the cold would be the first thing to greet you. It is a wet, heavy chill that smells of salt spray, wet iron, and the deep, dark deep. A young sailor stands near the railing, his silhouette cutting a lonely figure against the backdrop of 1,000 stars. He is barely 20 years old. A year ago, he was sweeping the floors of a bakery, his hands dusted with flour. Now, his hands are hidden deep inside the pockets of a thick, woolen coat, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He wears a heavy sweater beneath his coat, knitted with thick, pale yarn. It was made by his mother, her hands working the needles by the light of a fire in a living room thousands of miles away. Every stitch in that wool is a silent wish for his safety, a tangible piece of her love wrapped around his chest to keep the biting wind at bay. He shifts his weight as the bow of the ship rises slowly over a dark swell, then dips gently back down, a slow, mesmerizing rocking motion that feels like the breathing of a massive, sleeping creature. In the quiet of the night watch, there is very little to do but look at the stars and remember. He reaches into his coat pocket and his fingers brush against a small, smooth stone. His little sister had found it on a beach during a summer holiday, pressing it into his palm just before he boarded his train. He turns the stone over and over in the dark, its surface worn perfectly smooth by the tides. It is a tiny, heavy piece of home. Holding it, he can almost hear the sound of seagulls, the laughter of children splashing in the shallows, and the soft voice of his mother calling them in for supper. Footsteps approach on the metal deck, soft and deliberate. Another young man, wrapped in an identical heavy coat, steps up beside him. He does not speak right away. He simply offers a battered tin thermos. The first boy unscrews the cup and pours a measure of dark, steaming coffee. The heat blooms against his cold palms, a sudden, glorious comfort in the freezing night. They share the drink in silence, watching the white crests of the waves materialize out of the blackness and vanish just as quickly. When they finally speak, their voices are hushed murmurs, stolen by the wind. They talk of quiet, ordinary things. A girl with ribbons in her hair who promised to write. A stubborn old dog that waits by the garden gate. The smell of roasted potatoes on a Sunday afternoon. They trade these memories like precious coins, letting the warmth of the past carry them through the cold, lonely hours of the present. Beneath them, hidden beneath the churning surface, the world changes entirely. As you descend into the deep, the stormy gray of the surface fades into a muted emerald, then to a deep sapphire, and finally, into absolute, crushing blackness. Here, in the silent depths, glides the submarine. It is a world of iron and shadows, completely disconnected from the sky, the sun, and the stars. Inside the long, metal cylinder, the air is thick, warm, and heavy. It smells of diesel oil, unwashed cotton, damp leather, and the faint, sweet scent of canned fruit. There are no seasons in the deep. There is no day, and there is no night. Time is marked only by the gentle, ever-present hum of the electric motors and the soft, colorful glow of the instrument panels. To live in a submarine is to live in a state of enforced, intimate quiet. When the ship is submerged, silence is survival. The men move like ghosts through the narrow, crowded corridors. They wear thick woolen socks, stepping softly over the steel grates, knowing that the drop of a wrench or the heavy scuff of a boot could send a sound echoing out into the vast, listening ocean. They learn to close doors with infinite care, to turn valves with slow, deliberate pressure, and to speak only in the softest of whispers. In the forward compartment, men sleep in narrow canvas bunks suspended directly over heavy brass machinery. It is so terribly cramped that when a man turns over in his sleep, his shoulder brushes the cold steel ceiling above him. Yet, in this suffocating closeness, they find a profound and unexpected comfort. They are entirely reliant upon one another. They breathe the same recycled air, they lean against the same curved walls, and they share the exact same quiet fears in the dark. By the dim, crimson glow of a nightlight, a young boy lies in a bottom bunk. He is a farmer's son, a boy who grew up beneath wide, open skies and fields of golden wheat. Now, he is encased in steel at the bottom of the sea. He holds a piece of paper so worn and folded that it feels as soft as fabric. It is a letter from his father. He does not need enough light to read the words, he has memorized them entirely. He traces the invisible ink with his fingertip. The letter does not speak of bravery or duty. It simply tells him that the roof on the barn has been fixed, that the winter wheat is growing well, and that his place at the kitchen table is waiting for him. The boy smiles softly in the red glow. He carefully folds the paper, slips it into a worn leather wallet, and tucks it beneath his thin pillow. He rests his hand against the cold, sweating curve of the hole beside his face. Just millimeters of steel separate him from the crushing weight of the entire Atlantic Ocean, but in his mind, he is walking down a dirt road in the sunshine, heading home for the evening harvest. Sometimes, if the internal machinery is quiet enough, the men in the deep can hear the ocean itself. Beyond the metal walls, the water carries strange, haunting sounds. The ethereal, melodic clicks and long, mournful groans of whales communicating across hundreds of miles. The gentle, rushing sound of deep underwater currents shifting the sands of the ocean floor. It is a lonely, beautiful music, a reminder of the vast, ancient world they are floating through, a world that cares nothing for the squabbles of men. If you could step back and look at this vast expanse of water, you would see a profound and beautiful truth. The boy standing on the freezing deck of the freighter, staring up at the moon, and the boy lying in the red glow of the submarine, feeling the gentle tilt of the submerged hull, are bound together by the exact same water. They do not know each other. They wear different uniforms, they pray in different languages, and they have been told that they are enemies. But the ocean does not know the difference. To the sea, there are no flags, no borders, and no sides. There are only fragile human beings, suspended in the dark, floating far away from the mothers who love them. When the sea grows rough, or when the quiet tension of the unknown becomes too heavy to bear, the silent prayers that rise from the water are identical. A whispered plea spoken into the collar of a wool coat on the surface. A silent thought sent up to the steel ceiling of a bunk in the deep. Keep me safe. Let me see my home again. Watch over my family while I am gone. These prayers float out into the darkness, drifting through the water and the wind, mingling together in the vast, uncaring void. In this lonely environment, the smallest moments of kindness become monumental. Deep in the submarine, a sailor reaches into his locker and pulls out a single, precious tin of hard lemon candies. He has been saving them for a month. He taps his friend on the shoulder, a man who is missing his newborn daughter, and silently presses a bright yellow candy into his palm. No words are exchanged, only a grateful, tear-filled smile in the dim light. The sharp, sweet taste of the lemon is a sudden, bright burst of color in a world of gray and iron. Up above, on the swaying deck of the convoy, a seasoned cook finishes his shift and walks down the narrow corridor to the sleeping quarters. He carries an extra, heavy wool blanket. He finds a young recruit shivering in his bunk, pale and seasick from the endless rolling of the waves. The cook gently drapes the blanket over the sleeping boy, tucking it in around his shoulders, and briefly rests a warm, calloused hand on the boy's forehead. It is the gesture of a father, a quiet assurance that someone is watching over him in the dark. The ocean, for all its terrifying vastness, is also a cradle. The rocking motion is universal and ancient. From the very beginning of human time, mothers have rocked their babies in their arms to soothe them to sleep. Now, the great, dark ocean rocks these grown men. The bow of the freighter dips and rises, dips and rises. The submarine gently lists to the left, then slowly corrects to the right. As the long night stretches on, the boundaries between the men begin to blur entirely. They are all simply sailors, enveloped in the quiet mystery of the deep. They dream of solid ground, of green grass beneath their feet, of a front porch swing that does not tilt with the horizon. They dream of a world that is still, and quiet, and safe. Eventually, the dawn begins to break on the surface. It does not come with a sudden burst of light, but with a slow, pale softening of the darkness. A faint gray line appears on the very edge of the world. The stars slowly blink out, one by one. The water changes from ink black to a deep, pearlescent silver, catching the first fragile rays of the morning sun. Down below, in the eternal twilight of the submarine, they do not see the dawn. But they feel the shift in the watch. They hear the quiet murmur of the men changing posts. They feel the shared, unspoken realization that they have survived another night in the dark. The water laps gently against the steel hulls, both above and below. The ocean remains a vast, silent witness to their shared humanity, offering no judgment, only the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of the tides. And as the morning light spills across the endless waves, the sea simply whispers, carrying them all forward, holding them safe for one more quiet, peaceful hour. To look up at the sky is to look into a vast, silent ocean of air, where the clouds drift like slow, white ships on a canvas of endless blue. Long before the world below knew the heavy, rumbling weight of the era, the sky was simply a place of birdsong and shifting weather. It belonged to the wind, to the rain, and to the quiet turning of the seasons. But as the autumn leaves began to turn from green to burnt orange and pale gold, the sky took on a new, strange kind of life. It became a ceiling of glass and silver, a vast, lonely theater where young men floated miles above the earth, separated from the world they knew by nothing more than a thin layer of freezing air and curved perspex. If you could sit beside one of these young men in the cramped, freezing cockpit of his machine, you would not hear the roar of the engines. At such dizzying heights, the sound becomes a steady, hypnotic hum, a constant vibration that settles into the bones and lulls the mind into a strange, detached state of calm. He sits wrapped in thick layers of heavy sheepskin and brown leather, his breath frosting on the glass in front of him. He is a boy who, just a few years ago, was learning to drive his father's motorcar down a quiet country lane. Now, he is navigating by the stars, suspended in the deep, freezing quiet of the stratosphere. From up here, the earth below looks nothing like a world of conflict. It is a beautiful, silent tapestry. He looks down through the clear glass and sees the gentle, rolling hills of the continent looking like a soft patchwork quilt of greens, browns, and fading yellows. He sees the silver ribbons of rivers winding lazily through dark forests. There are no borders visible from the clouds. There are no lines drawn in the soil. There is only the beautiful, fragile sphere of the earth, turning slowly in the pale light of the morning sun. In the loneliness of the high altitude, the mind turns to gentle things. The young pilot reaches forward with a thickly gloved hand and gently taps a small, black and white photograph taped to the instrument panel. It is a picture of his wife, standing on a porch with a small, bundled baby in her arms. The edges of the paper are curled from the condensation, but her smile is bright and clear. He traces the shape of her face with his thumb, whispering a quiet good morning to her over the hum of the engine. He imagines the smell of the baby's talcum powder, the soft warmth of his wife's hand, and the sound of the wind rustling the oak tree in their front yard. Up here, surrounded by the infinite emptiness of the sky, that small square of paper is the only thing tethering him to the earth. Miles away, slicing through the very same sea of clouds, another boy sits in a different cockpit. He wears a different uniform, and the dials on his dashboard are printed in a different language, but his eyes hold the exact same quiet weariness. He is nursing a thermos of lukewarm, bitter coffee, letting the faint warmth of the metal cup thaw his stiff fingers. He looks out of his window and sees the strange, silent beauty of the war in the air. He watches the contrails, long, pure white clouds of spun ice, blown behind the engines, stretching across the blue like delicate strokes of a painter's brush. They weave and cross over one another, creating a beautiful, surreal geometry in the heavens. For a moment, he forgets why he is there. He simply watches the white ribbons unfurl against the blue, mesmerized by the quiet grace of it all. He feels a strange, unspoken kinship with the other machines floating in the distance. They are all just boys caught in glass bubbles, shivering in the cold, holding their breath in the thin air, waiting to go back down to the warmth of the ground. But down below, the ground is waiting, too. As the autumn afternoon deepens into dusk, the golden light softens, casting long, melancholy shadows across the cobblestone streets of the cities. The leaves are falling in earnest now, drifting down from the elms and the maples, carpeting the sidewalks in shades of rust and gold. It is a quiet, domestic hour. It is the time when shopkeepers are sweeping their front steps, when children are being called in from the parks, and when the smell of roasting vegetables and baking bread begins to drift from chimney pots. Then, the siren begins. It does not sound like a sudden terror, but rather a long, low, mournful sigh that rises and falls like the breathing of a tired giant. It is a sad, familiar song that echoes down the alleys and ripples over the rooftops. When it sounds, there is no panic. There is only the quiet, practiced routine of ordinary people doing what they must do. A mother stands in her kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She methodically turns off the stove, pulls the heavy blackout curtains tightly across the window, and picks up a small, worn wicker basket. Inside are the essentials of survival, reduced to their most humble forms: a thermos of hot tea, a tin of shortbread biscuits, a deck of playing cards, a flashlight, and a thick, hand-knitted blanket. She calls softly to her children, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the flutter in her heart. They take her hands, their small fingers grasping hers tightly, and together they walk down the narrow wooden stairs into the dark. The basement is a sanctuary of damp brick and old earth. It smells of stored apples, dusty coal, and the comforting, slightly sweet scent of old paper. A kerosene lantern hangs from a nail on a wooden beam, casting a warm, flickering, amber glow over the faces of the neighbors who have gathered there. They sit on wooden crates and lumpy mattresses, wrapping their coats tightly around their knees. This underground room is a world entirely separate from the vast, freezing sky above. Here, there is a profound, almost sacred sense of intimacy. An elderly man in a tweed cap offers a small, striped peppermint candy to the little girl sitting across from him. She takes it with a shy smile, the crinkle of the cellophane wrapper sounding loud in the hushed room. Beside them, two women speak in low, murmuring whispers about a recipe for plum jam, keeping their voices remarkably steady, anchoring themselves to the beautifully mundane details of life. When the low, muffled thuds finally begin, rolling across the earth like a distant summer thunderstorm, the basement trembles. It is a slow, rhythmic shaking, as if the earth itself is shivering in the cold. A fine, white dusting of plaster drifts down from the ceiling, falling like a gentle indoor snow. It settles on their shoulders, on the brims of their hats, and on the woolen blankets. The mother pulls her children closer, wrapping her arms around them, creating a human shield of soft fabric and unconditional love. She buries her face in her son's hair, breathing in the scent of his skin, humming a quiet, wordless lullaby against his ear. The hum vibrates through her chest, a steady, soothing rhythm that drowns out the shaking of the walls. In the dim, amber light of the lantern, surrounded by the quiet murmurs of their neighbors, they are safe. They are a single, breathing organism of community, holding on to one another in the dark, waiting for the storm to pass. And eventually, it always passes. The heavy thuds slowly fade away, replaced by a deep, ringing silence. Then, the siren sounds again, a single, steady, unbroken note that washes over the city like a long, collective exhale. The all clear. Slowly, the heavy wooden doors of the basements and shelters are pushed open. The people emerge into the cool, crisp air of the autumn night. The streets are darker now, the air thick with a faint, hazy smell of wood smoke and brick dust, but the sky above them is clear. They do not linger in the streets. They walk quietly back to their homes, their footsteps muffled by the fallen leaves. They unlock their front doors, stepping back into the familiar, comforting dark of their hallways. And then, the very first thing they do, the most important, necessary ritual of survival, is put the kettle on. In kitchens across the city, the soft, blue rings of gas flames flare to life in the dark. The water begins to bubble, a cheerful, domestic sound that pushes back against the vastness of the night. Teapots are warmed, delicate porcelain cups are set on saucers, and the dark, fragrant tea is poured. A woman sits at her small wooden table, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm mug. The heat of the ceramic seeps into her palms, a profound and simple comfort. She watches the thin wisp of steam rise into the air, curling and twisting before vanishing into the shadows. She takes a slow, careful sip, the warm liquid soothing her throat, grounding her firmly in the present moment. Her home is still here. Her children are asleep in their beds. The tea is warm. It is enough. It is a quiet, magnificent victory over the dark. Above her, high above the quiet rooftops, above the drifting smoke and the falling leaves, the sky has emptied. The silver machines have flown away, returning to the distant fields from which they came. The young pilots, shivering in their leather jackets, are guiding their planes back down to the earth, dreaming of a hot meal and a soft bed. The vast ocean of air is quiet once again. The clouds part, revealing the endless, glittering canopy of the stars. The moon rises, full and pale, casting a gentle, silver light over the world below. It shines on the quiet streets, on the sleeping children, on the empty teacups, and on the frost slowly gathering on the leaves. The night wraps its arms around the tired earth, holding it softly in the dark, whispering a promise of rest, of quiet, and of the peaceful, golden dawn that is waiting just beyond the horizon. The rain did not arrive with the fury of a storm, but with the slow, gray sigh of an autumn sky settling down to weep. It began as a mist, a fine and silver veil that drifted over the vast, sweeping plains of the east, turning the golden hues of late summer into a pale, watercolor world of ash and slate. For days that stretched into weeks, the sun simply forgot to rise, hidden behind a thick, unbroken canopy of bruised clouds. The sky lowered itself until it felt close enough to touch, wrapping the landscape in a damp, heavy embrace. And with the rain came the transformation of the earth, a quiet, relentless dissolving of the solid ground beneath their feet. This was the season of the mud. It was not the ordinary, splashing mud of a childhood puddle, but a deep, primal element that seemed to possess a life and a will of its own. The dirt roads, the sweeping farm fields, the quiet village paths, they all melted, churning into a thick, dark ocean of heavy earth. It was a glue that bound itself to everything it touched. It swallowed the wheels of wooden carts, it erased the familiar pathways, and it pulled at the boots of the young men who were forced to walk through it. If you were to stand in the center of that endless, gray expanse, the very first thing you would notice is the physical weight of the world. Every single step became an act of profound, exhausting labor. A young man, barely out of his teenage years, lifts his boot. The mud holds on, a slow, sucking embrace that fights him for every inch. When he finally pulls his foot free, it is twice as heavy as it was a moment before, caked in thick, dark clay. He places it forward, sinking instantly back down to his ankles. Step by step, mile by mile, the journey is measured not in distance, but in the sheer, quiet endurance of the human spirit. He wears a heavy woolen coat that has not been dry in 14 days. The rain has seeped through the thick fibers, turning the fabric into a cold, sodden weight that rests heavily on his tired shoulders. Water drips steadily from the rim of his steel helmet, tracing cold, meandering paths down his dirty cheeks, carving pale lines through the soot and the soil. He does not bother to wipe the water away. He simply lowers his chin to his chest, tucking his face into the damp collar of his tunic, and leans forward into the wind. In this world of perpetual gray, color becomes a distant memory. Everything is painted in the same monotonous shades of brown, charcoal, and wet iron. To look out across the fields is to see an endless, blurred horizon where the muddy earth meets the weeping sky, with no scene to tell them apart. It is a lonely, isolating feeling, as if the rest of the world has simply washed away, leaving only this single, damp stretch of nowhere. To survive the relentless misery of the rain, the mind builds a fortress. When the body is entirely consumed by the cold and the wet, the imagination retreats to the warmest, driest places it can remember. The young man pauses, leaning heavily against the wooden shaft of a stalled supply wagon. He closes his eyes, tuning out the soft, pattering sound of the rain against his helmet. In the dark theater of his mind, he builds a fire. He pictures the familiar hearth of his childhood home. He can see the worn, soot-stained bricks, the gentle, hypnotic dance of the orange and yellow flames, and the glowing, cherry-red embers resting in the ashes. He can hear the sharp, comforting crackle of dry pine wood splitting in the heat. He imagines taking off his sodden boots and setting them on the hearthstone to dry. He pictures the steam rising from the wool, carrying with it the smell of damp earth, replaced slowly by the rich, beautiful scent of a roasting supper. He imagines his mother's favorite armchair, covered in a soft, dry quilt. He can almost feel the texture of that fabric against his fingertips, warm and completely free of moisture. The memory is so vivid, so perfectly constructed, that for a single, fleeting heartbeat, he can actually feel the phantom heat of the fire radiating against his frozen hands. It is a quiet, beautiful sanctuary, built entirely of memory and longing. He rests there for a moment, gathering the strength he needs, before opening his eyes and returning to the cold, gray reality of the rain. Across that very same field, separated by a stretch of churning, impassable earth, another young man is seeking the exact same refuge. He wears the uniform of the enemy, a fabric of a different color, now dyed the same uniform brown by the unforgiving mud. He sits huddled beneath a makeshift tent crafted from a canvas shelter half, strung between two leafless birch trees. The canvas sags under the weight of the water, a steady drip 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 falling directly onto the toe of his boot. He is holding a small, flat tin box, the kind that once held sweet tobacco. It is the only truly dry place left in his entire world. With trembling, mud-stained fingers, he clicks the tin open. Inside, wrapped carefully in a layer of oilcloth, is a letter from his wife. He does not take it out completely, terrified that the damp air will curl the edges or smudge the precious ink. He simply peels back the cloth enough to see her handwriting. The elegant, looping letters are a tether to a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. She writes of the autumn harvest back home, of the crisp, dry wind sweeping through the valley, and of the thick, woolen blankets she has washed and folded, waiting for his return. He traces her name with a dirty thumbnail. The contrast between the fragile, pristine paper and his own ruined, filthy hands is heartbreaking. He brings the tin to his face, resting his forehead against the cold metal, closing his eyes and letting the gentle, domestic words wash over him. He breathes in, hoping to catch a faint, lingering scent of her perfume, but there is only the smell of wet canvas and the deep, earthy musk of the mud. Yet, the words are enough. They are a tiny, glowing ember in the center of his chest, keeping the freezing rain at bay. As the afternoon fades into a bruised, twilight dusk, the reality of the mud creates a profound, unspoken shift in the world. The grand strategies, the orders barked from distant rooms, the sweeping lines drawn on paper maps, they all sink and disappear in the heavy clay. The earth itself refuses to allow the war to continue. The heavy machines are swallowed up to their axles, their engines coughing and dying in the wet. The rifles are clogged with dirt. The world simply grinds to an exhausting, muddy halt. And in that sudden, enforced stillness, a strange and fragile empathy begins to bloom. When the young man under the canvas looks out across the narrow, flooded valley, he does not see a landscape filled with monsters or faceless adversaries. He sees other boys, just as wretched, just as soaked, and just as exhausted as he is. He sees a silhouette in the distance, a figure hunched over, trying desperately to coax a tiny, sputtering flame to life beneath a wet helmet. He watches the match flare, a tiny pinprick of hopeful orange in the gloom, only to be instantly snuffed out by the wind and the rain. The figure slumps, his shoulders dropping in a gesture of absolute, universal defeat. The boy under the canvas does not feel triumph. He does not feel hatred. He feels a deep, resonating ache of profound understanding. He knows exactly what that defeat feels like. He knows the desperate craving for just one mouthful of warm tea, the agonizing stiffness of cold fingers, the heavy, sinking despair of a fire that will not catch. In that quiet, gray moment, the uniform vanishes completely. There is no enemy. There is only a mirror. There is only another human being, shivering in the exact same rain, trapped in the exact same mud, dreaming of the exact same dry hearth. As night falls, the rain continues its slow, steady drumbeat against the earth. The darkness is absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket that hides the world from view. But in the dark, the shared misery becomes a quiet, unseen bond. A cough echoes from one side of the flooded field, a harsh, rattling sound that speaks of damp lungs and deep fatigue. A moment later, an answering cough drifts back from the other side. It is not a challenge. It is a simple, unintentional acknowledgement of presence. I am here. I am cold. I am surviving. No shots are fired into the dark. The unspoken truce of the mud settles over the valley. Both sides understand, without a single word ever being spoken, that the true enemy tonight is the rain, the plunging temperature, and the endless, sucking earth. They grant each other the quiet dignity of simply trying to make it through until morning. In a deep, waterlogged trench, 3 soldiers sit huddled together beneath a single, sodden blanket. They are pressed shoulder to shoulder, sharing the meager, failing warmth of their own bodies. One of them, a boy who used to sing in a village choir, begins to hum. It is a low, gentle sound, barely louder than the patter of the rain. It is not a marching song, but a slow, melancholic folk tune about a river winding through a green valley in the spring. The vibration of his voice carries through his chest and into the shoulders of the men leaning against him. The melody is a soft, golden thread weaving through the damp, freezing dark. It speaks of softer days, of sunlight warming the soil, of flowers blooming on dry banks. The other 2 men close their eyes, letting the hum wash over them, letting it carry them away from the mud and the cold. The sound drifts up, out of the trench, and floats lightly across the barren, ruined space between the lines. It mixes with the wind and the falling rain. And on the other side, a sentry standing in water up to his calves hears the faint, ghostly melody. He does not raise an alarm. He simply leans his head back against the muddy wall of his post, listening. He does not know the words, but he understands the feeling perfectly. It is a song of longing. It is a song of home. He stands there in the dark, an audience of one, sharing a quiet, beautiful moment of peace with a boy he will never meet. The mud holds them all. It coats their boots, their clothes, and their hands, turning them all into the exact same color of the earth from which they came. It slows their movements and humbles their spirits. But it also strips away the artifice, leaving behind nothing but the raw, vulnerable core of their humanity. As the long night stretches on, the young men sleep in brief, shivering stretches. They hold tightly to their memories of warm fires, of dry wood, and of the gentle hands of the people who loved them. They keep those memories safe in the deep, quiet places of their hearts, shielding them from the damp and the dark. And overhead, the gray clouds continue to drift, the rain continues to fall in a soft, whispering hush, washing over the broken earth, holding the world in its quiet, melancholic embrace, waiting patiently for the distant, gentle promise of the dawn. To step into the deep jungle is to be swallowed whole by a world that is always breathing, heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient, shadowed leaves. If you were to leave the beaches behind and walk into the tree line, you would find that the world you knew simply ceases to exist. There is no horizon here. There is no sky. There is only an endless, woven tapestry of green, stretching up and out in every conceivable direction. It is a suffocating, beautiful maze of giant ferns, thick, winding vines, and towering mahogany trees whose branches knit together so tightly they steal the sun before it can ever touch the ground. Down on the forest floor, it is a permanent, murky twilight, painted in deep shades of jade, emerald, and moss. For the young men sent into this labyrinth, the first and most overwhelming shock was not the enemy, but the air itself. It is not like the air of a summer afternoon in a familiar hometown. The air in the jungle is a physical weight. It is thick, wet, and intensely hot, wrapping around the chest like a heavy woolen blanket pulled straight from a basin of warm water. It fills the lungs with the scent of crushing orchids, rotting wood, and the deep, rich musk of a million growing things. A young man sits at the base of a massive, ancient tree, its roots rising up around him like the wooden walls of a quiet cathedral. He is a boy who grew up in a place where the wind sweeps freely across flat, open plains of golden wheat, where you can see for miles in any direction. Here, he cannot see further than 10 or 15 feet before the solid wall of vegetation blocks his vision. He wipes a trembling hand across his brow, pushing back hair that is entirely soaked. He has not felt dry in weeks. The heat saps the strength from his bones, making every movement slow, deliberate, and exhausting. His canvas uniform is heavy with the moisture of the forest, clinging to his shoulders. He leans his head back against the rough, damp bark of the tree and closes his eyes, trying desperately to remember the feeling of a cool, dry breeze. He pictures his father's front porch. He imagines the creak of the wooden swing, the condensation dripping down the outside of a glass of iced lemonade, and the soft, cool evening wind rustling the leaves of a single, solitary elm tree in the yard. He opens his eyes and reaches to his hip, unhooking his heavy metal canteen. Water, in this sweltering green furnace, is more precious than life itself. He shakes the canteen gently. There is no satisfying slosh, only a dull, faint metallic rattle. Perhaps 2 swallows remain. His throat burns with a dry, scratching ache. He begins to unscrew the small black cap, his thumb resting on the metal threads. But then he pauses. Beside him, huddled between the roots, is another boy from his hometown. This boy is younger, his face pale beneath the smudges of jungle dirt, his breathing shallow and rapid. The terrible, invisible fever of the jungle has found him. His lips are cracked, his eyes closed in a fitful, uneasy rest. The first young man looks at his canteen. He looks at his friend. Slowly, quietly, so as not to startle him, he leans over and gently nudges the sick boy's shoulder. When the younger boy opens his fever-bright eyes, the first young man simply smiles, a soft, reassuring expression, and presses the open canteen to his friend's dry lips. He tilts it up, watching the last precious drops of water disappear. He does not take a single drop for himself. In the grand, sweeping history of the world, this moment will never be recorded. But in the quiet stillness of the jungle, it is an act of breathtaking, radiant love. It is a quiet defiance of the harshness surrounding them, a beautiful refusal to let the jungle strip away his humanity. Across a narrow, winding ravine, hidden completely behind a thick curtain of broad, waxy leaves, another young man sits in the suffocating heat. He wears a different uniform, a shade of khaki that has faded into the exact same color of the mud beneath his boots. He, too, is unimaginably far from home. He was raised among the delicate, pale pink blossoms of cherry trees and the cool, rushing streams of mountain forests. Now, he sits in the stifling dark of the emerald canopy, feeling just as lost, just as small, and just as frightened by the sheer, imposing majesty of the wild. He is holding something incredibly fragile in his hands. It is a letter from his older sister. The paper, once crisp and white, has grown soft and pulpy from the relentless humidity. It feels like a piece of damp cloth. He handles it with the reverence of a holy relic. The ink has begun to run, the elegant, dark characters blooming and blurring into soft, blue clouds. If he unfolds it too quickly, the paper will tear, and a piece of his home will be lost forever. He reads the blurred words by the dim, green light filtering through the leaves above. She writes of the autumn moon reflecting in the koi pond behind their house. She writes of their mother's quiet prayers at the small wooden shrine in the hallway. As he reads, a single tear escapes his eye, tracing a clean path through the dirt on his cheek, falling onto the damp paper and blurring one more word. He does not wipe the tear away. He simply folds the delicate letter with trembling fingers, slipping it carefully into a waterproof pouch, pressing it flat against his chest. It is his anchor. It is the only proof he has that a gentle, beautiful world still exists outside this labyrinth of vines. When the sun finally dips below the horizon, the jungle does not grow quiet. The darkness that falls is absolute. It is a heavy, ink-black void that presses against the eyes. And with the dark comes the chorus. The forest erupts into a staggering symphony of sound. Millions of unseen insects begin to click and hum, a vibrating wall of noise that seems to shake the very air. Night birds call out with strange, echoing cries. Leaves rustle and branches snap as unseen creatures move through the undergrowth. It is a terrifying, disorienting sound for a boy used to the quiet hum of a city street or the gentle crickets of a farm. The young men lie on the damp earth, staring up into a blackness so deep it feels like they are floating in the emptiness of space. They cannot see their own hands in front of their faces. They are entirely alone with their thoughts, listening to the wild, untamed heartbeat of the earth. But even in this terrifying darkness, the jungle offers moments of strange, surreal beauty. A young sentry, sitting perfectly still in the blackness, notices a faint, ghostly glow near the toe of his boot. He blinks, thinking his tired eyes are playing tricks on him. But the light remains. He reaches out cautiously, his fingertips brushing against a piece of rotting wood. Along the bark, tiny, delicate clusters of fungi are emitting a soft, luminescent, pale green light. It is foxfire, glowing quietly in the dark. He looks around and realizes the forest floor is dotted with these tiny, gentle stars. It is as if the sky has fallen, scattering small constellations across the roots and the mud. For a moment, the fear recedes, replaced by a profound, childlike wonder. He watches the soft green glow, letting it soothe his racing heart. It is a tiny, silent reminder that even in the darkest, most frightening places on earth, there is still light. There is still beauty. Later in the night, the heavy, oppressive heat finally breaks, shattered by the sudden, roaring arrival of a monsoon storm. There is no warning. The sky simply opens, dumping a solid wall of warm, heavy water onto the canopy above. The rain crashes against the giant leaves, a deafening, percussive roar that drowns out the insects and the birds. The water cascades down the trunks of the trees, turning the forest floor into a rushing, muddy river in a matter of seconds. In the sudden chaos of the storm, a young soldier scrambling for higher ground slips, sliding down a muddy embankment into the tangled roots of a massive banyan tree. He huddles there, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to shield his face from the blinding sheets of water. A sudden, brilliant flash of lightning tears through the canopy, illuminating the jungle in a harsh, stark blue light for a fraction of a second. In that single, frozen moment, he sees that he is not alone. Less than 10 feet away, sheltering beneath the exact same overhang of roots, is a soldier from the opposing side. The thunder cracks, a physical blow that shakes the ground, and the world is plunged instantly back into absolute blackness. The young man's heart hammers in his throat. He holds his breath, his hand gripping the whetstock of his rifle. He listens desperately, straining to hear the sound of movement over the deafening roar of the rain. He waits for a shout. He waits for a struggle in the dark. But nothing happens. Through the roaring cascade of the monsoon, he hears only the sound of another human being shivering. A soft, involuntary intake of breath. A quiet, miserable cough. In the total darkness, surrounded by the terrifying power of the storm, the war suddenly feels incredibly small and far away. They are just two fragile, soaking wet boys, trapped in a forest that could swallow them both without a second thought. The fear of each other is entirely eclipsed by the overwhelming awe and terror of the ancient nature crashing down around them. The snow did not fall upon the ruined city with malice, but with a gentle, forgiving grace, trying to blanket the broken world in pure, silent white. Before the cold descended, the city beside the great river had been a place of wide, sweeping boulevards, of warm bakeries and the cheerful, echoing laughter of children playing in the public squares. But the season had turned, and the world had fractured. Now, the city was a vast, jagged landscape of shattered stone, fallen bricks, and the dark, twisted skeletons of iron and steel. Yet, as the deep winter arrived, it brought with it a profound and beautiful hush. The snow drifted down from a pale, porcelain sky, landing softly on the sharp edges of the rubble, rounding the corners of the broken world, and turning the devastating wreckage into a quiet, strange, and solitary moonscape. To walk through this frozen labyrinth was to walk through a dream suspended in ice. The great river, once a rushing ribbon of dark water, had slowed, thickened, and finally frozen solid, trapping the ripples and waves beneath a thick, opaque sheet of white glass. The air was so terribly crisp, so unimaginably cold, that every breath drawn into the lungs felt like a swallow of tiny, sparkling needles. When a young man exhaled, his breath bloomed into a thick, curling cloud of white vapor, hanging in the still air for a long, fragile moment before dissolving into the frost. To survive the sheer, biting magnitude of this cold, the young men who found themselves trapped in this ruined city had to disappear from the surface of the earth. They moved underground, descending into the dark, forgotten cellars of what used to be apartment buildings, theaters, and homes. Down in the dark, beneath the tons of collapsed concrete and snow, they sought the one thing that mattered more than anything else in the world: warmth. In the deep gloom of one such cellar, the walls are coated in a thick, glittering layer of hoarfrost that looks like crystal moss. A boy, no older than 20, sits in the corner. He is wrapped in so many layers of scavenged clothing, a torn wool coat, a patchwork quilt, a thick woolen scarf wound tightly around his head, that he hardly looks like a soldier at all. He looks like a traveler who has lost his way in a terrible storm. His hands are tucked deep into his armpits, his shoulders shivering in a steady, involuntary rhythm. He is incredibly tired. It is a weariness that goes far beyond the muscles. It is a deep, settling exhaustion of the soul. In the quiet dark, with nothing to do but listen to the wind howling through the empty elevator shafts above, his mind travels thousands of miles away. He closes his tired eyes, shutting out the frost and the shadows, and pictures a small, wooden house at the edge of a pine forest. He can see the kitchen stove, cast iron and glowing with a deep, radiant heat. He can hear the soft, rhythmic hum of his grandmother's spinning wheel, a sound that used to lull him to sleep when he was a child. He imagines walking into that kitchen, peeling off his frozen boots, and pressing his numb hands flat against the warm, dark metal of the stove. The memory is so incredibly vivid that his chest aches with the beauty of it. He takes a slow, shaky breath, holding the image of that warm room in his mind like a precious, fragile flame, shielding it from the freezing air of the cellar. He shifts his weight and feels a small, hard lump in his pocket. With clumsy, frozen fingers, he reaches inside and pulls out a tiny, precious scrap of bread. It is no larger than a walnut, dark and frozen, completely solid, hard as a piece of river stone. He does not bite into it. Instead, he places it carefully in his mouth, tucking it into his cheek. He waits patiently for the meager warmth of his own body to thaw the bread, tasting the faint, earthy flavor of the grain. In this frozen wasteland, that tiny crumb is a feast. It is a miracle of survival. Just across a narrow courtyard filled with snow-covered debris, hidden beneath the collapsed floorboards of what was once a grand library, another young man sits in the dark. He wears a different uniform, a different shape of helmet, and he speaks a different language. But the frost clinging to his eyelashes is identical. The violent, uncontrollable shivering of his shoulders is exactly the same. He sits near a narrow slit in the foundation, where a single, pale beam of moonlight filters down through the snow. In his trembling hands, he holds a piece of paper. The paper is stiff with the cold, the creases deep and worn from being folded and unfolded 100 times. It is a letter from his father, written in the late days of summer, before the world turned entirely to ice. He holds the letter in the moonlight, reading the familiar, steady handwriting. His father writes about the horses in the barn, about how the old mare has finally foaled, and about how they are saving a jar of sweet summer honey for his return. As the boy reads the words, a single, warm tear escapes his eye. It rolls down his soot-stained cheek, cutting a clean path through the dirt, before freezing halfway to his chin. He gently touches the frozen tear with his fingertip. He misses his father with a desperation that eclipses the war, eclipses the city, and eclipses the cold. He presses the letter to his lips, kissing the signature, and tucks it back against his chest, right over his beating heart. In the grip of such profound, crushing suffering, the grand illusions of the world begin. The young man slowly, carefully relaxes his grip on his rifle. He leans his head back against the muddy roots. He knows the enemy is sitting just a few feet away, probably as terrified and as cold as he is. Neither of them moves. Neither of them speaks. They simply share the tiny, hollow sanctuary of the tree, granting each other a silent, unspoken truce in the face of the storm. They sit in the dark, separated by a few feet of mud and a world of politics, but united completely in their vulnerability. For the next hour, they are not soldiers. They are just humans, huddled together against the rain, waiting for the sky to clear. When the rain finally stops, the sudden quiet is just as shocking as the storm. The air is washed clean, smelling sharply of ozone and bruised leaves. The heavy dripping of water echoes through the trees, a slow, gentle rhythm. A pale, gray light begins to filter through the canopy as morning approaches. A thick, white mist rises from the jungle floor, wrapping the trees in a soft, ghostly embrace. The young man looks over at the hollow between the roots. It is empty. The other boy has slipped away into the mist, vanishing back into the green labyrinth as silently as a ghost. The young soldier lets out a long, slow breath. He rests his head on his knees, listening to the gentle drip of the water. He reaches into his pocket, his fingers finding a small, smooth stone his mother had given him before he left. He rubs his thumb across its surface, a small, tangible piece of a world that is soft, and safe, and dry. As the emerald canopy begins to glow with the first light of the morning, he closes his tired eyes. He listens to the quiet echoes of the jungle, no longer just a terrifying maze, but a living, breathing testament to survival. And nestled within its massive roots, wrapped in the cool morning mist, he finally drifts into a quiet, peaceful sleep, dreaming of an open window, a gentle breeze, and the sweet, comforting smell of home. to crack and fade away. The lines drawn on maps, the speeches made in warm, distant capital cities, the colors of the flags, they all lose their meaning in the face of 30 degrees below zero. The cold is an absolute equalizer. It strips away the armor of the soldier and leaves behind only the fragile, vulnerable core of the human being. When the temperature drops so low that the steel of a rifle barrel burns the bare skin like fire, a strange and quiet phenomenon occurs in the ruins. The desperate need to simply stay alive supersedes everything else. Imagine a night when the wind dies down, leaving the ruined city in a state of absolute, ringing silence. In the basement of a shattered factory, the first boy has managed to build a tiny, secret fire. It is built in a rusted tin bucket, using pages torn from a ruined book and small splinters of shattered floorboards. The flame is impossibly small, no larger than a candle, but in the pitch-black freezing cellar, it is a magnificent, glowing beacon of hope. He leans close to it, his hands hovering just inches from the tiny orange tongues of fire, soaking in the microscopic amount of heat. From the dark corridor just beyond the cellar door, there is a soft, scraping sound. A footstep. The boy freezes. His breath catches in his throat. He slowly reaches for the rifle resting beside his knee, his numb fingers wrapping around the freezing wood of the stock. He stares into the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. From the gloom, a figure emerges. It is the second boy. He is covered in a thick dusting of white snow, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and drawn. He is trembling so violently he can barely stand. He holds his weapon loosely, pointing at the ground. He does not look like an enemy. He looks like a ghost, a lost child wandering through a nightmare of ice. For a long, breathless eternity, the two boys simply stare at one another across the small, debris-filled room. The tiny fire flickers between them, casting long, dancing shadows on the frost-covered walls. All the training, all the orders, all the reasons they were brought to this frozen hell tell them to raise their weapons. But the cold is heavier than the orders. The sheer, overwhelming exhaustion is stronger than the fear. The stranger in the doorway slowly, deliberately, lets his rifle slip from his fingers. It clatters softly onto the icy floor. He does not say a word. He simply raises his empty hands, his palms turned outward, and takes a slow, hesitant step toward the tin bucket. His eyes are fixed entirely on the tiny, dancing flame. The longing in his face is so pure, so desperately human, that it breaks the tension in an instant. The first boy slowly relaxes his grip. He leaves his rifle on the ground. He nods, just once, a tiny dip of his chin. The stranger steps fully into the room and sinks to his knees on the opposite side of the small fire. He holds his trembling hands out over the bucket. The two boys sit in absolute silence, separated by nothing more than 18 inches of space and a tiny, flickering fire. The first boy reaches into his deep coat pocket. He finds another small piece of frozen bread, a crust he had been saving for the morning. He pulls it out, looks at it for a moment, and then reaches across the fire. He holds the crust out to the stranger. The second boy looks at the bread, then slowly raises his eyes to meet the gaze of the one who offered it. In the soft, amber light of the embers, their eyes lock. There is no hatred there. There is no malice. There is only a deep, profound understanding of shared suffering. The stranger takes the bread with a trembling hand, nodding his head in a silent, overwhelming gesture of gratitude. They sit together in the dark, chewing the hard bread, watching the tiny flames consume the splinters of wood. The harsh angles of the war melt away in the warmth of that shared space. For this one night, in this one forgotten cellar, they are not soldiers. They are brothers in the frost, huddled together against the vast, indifferent emptiness of the winter. As the hours pass, the fire slowly burns down to a soft, cherry-red bed of embers. The boys do not move. They sit shoulder to shoulder now, leaning against the cold brick wall, sharing the meager warmth of their tired bodies. The silence between them is no longer tense, but deeply comforting. It is the silence of companionship, of not having to be alone in the dark. High above them, through a jagged hole in the collapsed ceiling, the heavy snow clouds finally begin to part. The deep, velvet blackness of the night sky is revealed, swept clean by the freezing wind. They tilt their heads back and look up. Scattered across the vast, dark canvas of the universe is a brilliant, breathtaking tapestry of stars. They are crisp, clear, and piercingly bright, shining like shattered diamonds scattered on dark glass. The stars do not care about the broken city below. They do not care about the uniforms, or the languages, or the reasons the world has torn itself apart. They simply shine, offering their ancient, quiet light to anyone who takes the time to look up. The boys look at the same constellations, the same patterns of silver light that hang over their mothers' homes, over their fathers' fields, over the quiet lives they left behind. In the peaceful, freezing dark, the snow begins to fall once more. The flakes drift down through the hole in the roof, floating gently through the still air like tiny, weightless feathers. They land softly on the shoulders of the two boys, on their coats, and on the cooling embers of the fire. Wrapped in the shared quiet of the cellar, tethered to the earth by the fragile warmth they have given one another, the young men close their heavy eyes. They let the image of the stars carry them away from the ruins, away from the ice, and back to the gentle, glowing hearths of their memories. And as the snow continues its soft, hushed lullaby over the broken steel of the city, they finally find a moment of true, unbroken peace, sleeping side by side in the silent, forgiving dark. The Pacific Ocean does not announce its vastness, it simply hums, a low and endless vibration beneath 1,000,000 miles of empty blue. To sail out into the heart of that great water is to leave the very edges of the world behind. It is a blue so deep, so absolute, and so brilliantly clear that it feels less like an ocean and more like falling upward into a second, heavier sky. For the young men stationed on the floating islands of gray steel that drifted across this expanse, the ocean was not yet a place of conflict. It was a quiet, profound, and beautifully terrifying void where time simply forgot how to move forward. Before the roar of aircraft engines, before the smoke and the chaos, there was only the waiting. And the waiting was its own kind of heavy, silent burden. It is a strange and agonizing thing to sit in the middle of a beautiful, sunlit nowhere, knowing that a storm is coming but unable to see a single cloud. The hours stretch and pull, growing thin and translucent. The men on board try to anchor themselves to the present moment through the comfort of tiny, repetitive routines. They polish brass fittings that already gleam like mirrors. They fold and unfold their woolen blankets, smoothing out invisible wrinkles. They sweep decks that have already been swept clean by the constant, salty wind. They do these things slowly, deliberately, giving their trembling hands a purpose, anything to keep the mind from wandering out into the deep water. If you were to walk along the outer walkway of one of these massive ships in the late afternoon, the only sound you would hear is the rhythmic, hypnotic breathing of the sea. It is the gentle, steady lapping of the water against the great steel hull. Swell and fall. Swell and fall. It is a slow, ancient heartbeat. For boys who had grown up surrounded by the rustling cornfields of the American Midwest, or the busy, narrow streets of crowded coastal cities, this sound was entirely alien. Yet, in the quiet isolation of the Pacific, that soft rushing of water against metal became the only lullaby they had. A young sailor stands leaning heavily against the railing. The steel beneath his forearms is warm, baked by the intense afternoon sun. He is staring out at the horizon, but his eyes are completely unfocused. He is not looking for the enemy. He is looking right through the curve of the earth, trying to see all the way back to a front porch in a small, quiet town. His hands, resting on the top rail, are smudged with dark machine grease, but tucked safely inside his left breast pocket is something pristine and deeply sacred. He slowly reaches inside, his fingers moving with absolute reverence, and pulls out a small, square photograph. It is protected by a thin piece of clear wax paper. He peels the paper back. The girl in the picture is smiling, her hair caught in a breeze that stopped blowing months ago. He traces the outline of her cheek with his grease-stained thumb, careful not to smudge the glossy paper. He remembers the exact smell of her perfume, something light, like lavender and rain. He remembers the way she laughed when he tripped over his own feet on the boardwalk. In the vast, crushing emptiness of the ocean, where the water is thousands of fathoms deep and stretches out forever, that small piece of paper is the entire weight of his world. It is the tether that keeps him from floating away into the blue. Beside him, another sailor steps up to the rail. He doesn't say a word. He simply leans against the steel, mirroring the posture, and holds out a small, crushed box of peppermint candies. The first boy takes one, nodding his thanks. The sharp, sweet taste of the mint blooms on his tongue, a sudden, bright burst of domestic normalcy in the middle of the wilderness. They stand there together, two boys from different lives, shoulder to shoulder, chewing their candy, watching the sun begin its slow, golden descent toward the water. They do not talk about tomorrow. They talk about the taste of the peppermint, and the warmth of the steel, and the profound, beautiful quiet of the evening. And across that exact same ocean, drifting over the exact same deep trenches and coral reefs, the sun casts its long, golden light over another ship. Here, the deck is arranged differently, and the voices that murmur in the fading light speak a different language, but the quiet, heavy tension of the weight is an identical mirror. A young man sits cross-legged on the deck, in the shadow of a massive gray smokestack. He is holding a small, delicate brush and a piece of thin, soft paper. He is writing a letter to his mother. His movements are precise, elegant, and deeply calming. He focuses his entire being on the shape of the ink as it flows from the brush to the page. He does not write about where he is, because the ocean looks the same everywhere. Instead, he writes about the courtyard of his childhood home. He asks if the plum tree has blossomed yet. He asks if his younger brother is keeping up with his studies. He writes these ordinary, gentle questions because they are the anchors of his soul. Wrapped around his waist, hidden beneath his uniform, is a wide cloth belt. It is covered in 1,000 tiny, red French knots. It was sewn by the women of his village, each knot stitched by a different hand, a collective, physical prayer for his safe return. As he finishes his letter, he presses his hand to his stomach, feeling the raised bumps of the thread through his shirt. He can almost feel the warmth of those hands, the soft murmurs of the women offering their blessings as they pulled the needle through the fabric. He closes his eyes and takes a deep, steadying breath of the salt air. The fear is there, resting heavy in his chest, but the love woven into that cloth is heavier still. As the sun finally slips below the edge of the world, the sky erupts into a breathtaking display of bruised purples, deep oranges, and soft, fading pinks. The ocean catches the light, turning the surface of the water into a vast floor of liquid copper. Then, the colors soften, melting into a deep, velvety indigo, and finally, into absolute black. Night on the open ocean is a darkness so profound it feels almost physical. There are no city lights to push it back. There are only the stars. They emerge in their millions, a thick, glowing river of silver dust spilled across the heavens. Down in the sleeping quarters of the ships, the air is thick and close, smelling of damp wool, engine oil, and the faint, coppery scent of nervous sweat. The bunks are stacked high, narrow canvas racks suspended by chains. The men lie in the dark, bathed in the dim, red glow of the night lights. It is in these quiet, claustrophobic hours that the weight becomes the hardest. When the eyes are closed, the mind has nowhere to go but inward. Yet, even here, there is a profound and gentle solidarity. A voice whispers from a top bunk. It is a slow, quiet drawl, breaking the silence of the compartment. The boy is talking about a car he is going to build when he gets home. He describes the engine, the color of the paint, the feel of the leather steering wheel. He speaks in a low, soothing murmur. From a few bunks down, another voice chimes in, offering a suggestion about the tires. Then another voice, talking about a road trip he wants to take out west. They build this imaginary world together in the dark. They pass the dream back and forth like a shared cup of water, adding details, laughing softly at gentle jokes, weaving a tapestry of a future they are all desperate to see. The whispered conversation is a blanket, a collective effort to keep the quiet terror of the unknown at bay. It is an act of everyday heroism, the simple, beautiful gift of distracting a frightened friend in the dark. The ship rolls, a slow, deep tilt to the port side, and then a gentle correction to the starboard. The chains holding the bunks creak softly. The water rushes against the hull outside, a constant, shushing sound. Shoo, shoo. It sounds like a mother hushing a restless child. The ocean holds them all in its massive, indifferent embrace. It does not know the names of these ships. It does not care about the flags they fly or the reasons they have sailed into the deep. The water is simply the water. It is ancient, and heavy, and profoundly peaceful. It supports the steel hulls, rocking them with the slow, eternal rhythm of the earth itself. The young men holding their photographs, the boys wearing their stitched belts, the sailors whispering about painted cars, they all listen to the same rushing water. They all feel the same slow rise and fall of the swell. In the absolute quiet of the deep Pacific night, there is no battle. There is only the starlight reflecting off the black waves, the gentle warmth of a shared memory, and the slow, steady breathing of thousands of young men trying to find rest. And as the long hours of the mid-watch finally begin to fade, the sea simply continues its quiet song, cradling the heavy steel, washing away the tension of the day, and offering a fleeting, beautiful moment of peace before the slow, inevitable breaking of the dawn. The night did not end, it simply held its breath, waiting for a morning that felt like it would never come. If you were to drift above the dark, churning waters of the channel in those final, quiet hours, you would not see a world preparing for a storm. You would see only the absolute, unbroken blackness of a restless sea. The wind swept across the whitecaps, carrying the sharp, bitter tang of salt and the deep, cold chill of the deep water. It was a lonely, sweeping wind that cared nothing for the plans of men. Beneath that starless sky, suspended on the heavy, rolling swells of the ocean, thousands of small, flat-bottomed boats were rising and falling in the dark. Inside these fragile steel shells, the world was reduced to the space of a few square feet. To stand in one of those narrow craft was to be surrounded by the overwhelming, physical presence of other human beings. The young men were packed shoulder to shoulder, chest to back, swaying together in a synchronized and voluntary dance as the ocean heaved beneath them. The air was thick and heavy, smelling intensely of diesel fuel, damp wool, wet canvas, and the quiet, metallic scent of nervous sweat. There is a profound and terrifying intimacy in being trapped together in the dark. A boy, whose face is pale and slick with cold sea spray, closes his eyes and leans his head back against the solid steel ramp in front of him. His stomach churns, violently rebelling against the relentless, pitching rhythm of the waves. He is so dizzy, so terribly cold, and so unimaginably frightened. He feels a heavy, rough canvas glove rest gently on his shoulder. He opens his eyes and turns his head. Beside him is a man a few years older, a baker who used to wake up before the sun to knead dough in a warm, flour-dusted kitchen. The older man does not speak. The roar of the engines and the crashing of the waves would drown out the words anyway. Instead, he simply squeezes the boy's shoulder, a slow, steady, grounding pressure. It is a silent anchor in the middle of a chaotic sea. "I am here," the touch says. "You are not alone. Just breathe." The younger boy nods, taking a slow, shaky breath of the cold air, drawing strength from the simple, radiant warmth of that hand. In the hours before they boarded these small, rocking boats, under the dim, hooded glow of flashlights in crowded canvas tents, nearly every one of these men had done the exact same thing. They had written letters. They sat on their helmets, or lay on their cots, resting small pads of paper against their knees. And in those final moments of quiet, they did not write about the grand sweep of history or the terrifying machinery waiting for them in the dark. They wrote about the most beautiful, ordinary things they could remember. A boy from a dusty farming town wrote to his mother, reminding her to make sure his younger brother oiled the tractor before the summer harvest. He asked if the stray dog they had taken in was still sleeping on the front porch. Another young man, an architecture student with ink-stained fingers, wrote to his new wife. He told her about a dream he had where they were walking through a quiet park in the autumn, listening to the dry leaves crunch beneath their shoes. They folded these fragile pieces of paper, these tiny, paper-thin pieces of their souls, and tucked them away. Now, standing in the freezing spray of the channel, those letters are pressed flat against their chests, hidden in waterproof pouches deep inside their tunics. They rest directly over their beating hearts. The letters are not just words, they are talismans. They are shields woven from pure love, carried into the dark to keep the cold away. Across that narrow stretch of dark water, on the quiet, sweeping beaches and atop the towering limestone cliffs, the world was completely still. Here, the earth had been poured into thick, heavy concrete. The bunkers sat in the dark like silent, sleeping giants, half buried in the soil and the seagrass. Inside these thick, damp walls, the air was entirely different. It was stale and perfectly still, smelling of wet limestone, crushed cigarettes, and old earth. In the narrow observation slit of one of these concrete rooms, a young sentry stands looking out over the invisible ocean. He is barely 18 years old. His uniform coat is far too large for him, the sleeves rolled up past his wrists. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the freezing dampness of the concrete floor from seeping through the soles of his boots. He raises his binoculars, peering into the pitch black, but there is nothing to see. There is only the rhythmic, endless crashing of the waves against the smooth stones of the beach below. Crash and pull. Crash and pull. It is a lonely, hypnotic sound. He lowers the heavy brass binoculars and rubs his tired eyes with the back of his hand. He turns away from the wind and walks to the back of the small, arched room. His companion, another boy from a quiet mountain village, is huddled over a tiny, smokeless tin stove. He is boiling a small canteen cup of water, brewing a bitter, dark chicory coffee. The tiny blue flame of the stove casts a faint, ghostly light on their faces. The first boy sits down on an empty wooden ammunition crate, holding his cold, stiff hands out toward the minuscule warmth of the flame. The second boy carefully hands him the tin cup. Their fingers brush for a moment, both sets of hands trembling slightly in the chill of the bunker. The sentry wraps his palms around the hot metal, letting the warmth soak into his skin before taking a slow, careful sip. The bitter liquid burns its way down his throat, a small, fierce comfort in the center of the cold concrete. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, wooden horse. It is carved from a piece of soft pine, the edges smoothed down by a pocket knife. He had spent the last 3 weeks carving it in the quiet hours of his watch, carefully shaping the ears and the mane. It is meant for his little nephew, a child who is just learning to walk in a house hundreds of miles away. He traces the smooth curve of the wooden horse with his thumb. In this heavy, imposing fortress designed to repel the world, this tiny, handmade toy is a heartbreaking reminder of the gentleness he left behind. He misses his sister's laugh. He misses the smell of wood smoke from their chimney. He looks at his friend, who is staring blankly at the small blue flame, lost in his own private memories of a home he desperately wishes he could return to. They do not view themselves as monsters guarding a fortress. They are just tired, cold teenagers, counting the hours until their shift ends, hoping the morning brings nothing but the familiar cry of the seagulls and the gentle warming of the sun. If you could step back and view this moment from high above the clouds, you would see a profound and agonizing tragedy. Separated by only a few miles of dark water, these two groups of boys are perfectly, beautifully identical in their humanity. They are all shivering in the exact same coastal wind. They are all desperately clinging to the memories of their mother's kitchens, of sweethearts' letters, of warm beds, and of a peaceful world that seems like a fading dream. If the heavy machinery of the era had not placed them here, in the dark, they could have easily sat across from one another in a brightly lit cafe, sharing a drink, laughing about clumsy mistakes, and talking about the futures they wanted to build. But the world had turned, and history had trapped them all in this terrible, breathless waiting game. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the absolute blackness of the night begins to lift. It is not the bright, triumphant golden sunrise of a summer morning. It is the slow, heavy lightening of the dark. The sky shifts from pitch black to a deep, bruised charcoal, and then to a pale, misty gray. This is the dawn without sun. A thick, silver mist clings to the surface of the water, hiding the horizon, blurring the line between the sky and the sea. The world is painted entirely in shades of slate and ash. In the landing craft, the young men can finally begin to see the faces of the boys standing next to them. The pale morning light reveals the deep shadows under their eyes, the tight, nervous lines around their mouths. A young man reaches up and carefully traces the silver cross hanging from a chain around his neck, his lips moving in a silent, urgent, and deeply private whisper. Beside him, another boy simply closes his eyes and pictures his front door, visualizing the brass handle, the chipped green paint, the exact way it squeaks when it opens. He holds onto that door handle in his mind with everything he has. On the shore, the sentry in the concrete bunker steps back up to the narrow slit. The cold morning air washes over his face. He looks out into the lifting mist, expecting to see the familiar, empty expanse of the gray water. The wooden horse is tucked safely in his pocket. He breathes in the smell of the salt and the wet sand. For one final, elongated second, the entire world is suspended in absolute, unbroken stillness. The engines have quieted to a low, trembling hum. The wind has dropped. The waves seem to pause before they break against the shore. It is a moment of pure, crystalline peace, hanging fragile and delicate in the cold morning air. In this single, collective holding of breath, there are no sides, no borders, and no enemies. There is only a generation of young men, floating on the water and standing in the concrete, carrying the love of their families in their pockets, waiting quietly together in the gray mist for the world to begin again. A wall of green does not look like a fortress until you try to walk through it. To step into the ancient, sunken lanes of the Normandy countryside in the height of summer is to step out of the wide, open world and into a secret, suffocating labyrinth. For centuries, the farmers of this quiet land had piled earth, stone, and bramble to mark their small apple orchards and pastures. Over generations, nature had taken these humble boundaries and woven them into towering, impenetrable walls of thick oak roots, hawthorn, and dense, dark ivy. They are called the hedgerows, but that simple word does not capture their massive, brooding presence. They are living, breathing barricades, rising high above the head of a grown man, casting deep, cool shadows over the narrow dirt paths that wind between them. For the young men who found themselves wandering through this beautiful, terrifying maze, the war suddenly became unimaginably small and profoundly, terribly intimate. There are no sweeping horizons here. There are no distant vistas to rest the eyes upon. The sky is reduced to a narrow, ragged ribbon of blue, visible only by tilting your head straight back and looking up through the canopy of leaves. Everything else is green, and brown, and desperately close. The air in the sunken lanes is heavy and still, trapping the heat of the summer sun. It smells overwhelmingly of life, the rich, dark scent of damp earth, the sharp tang of crushed nettles, and the sweet, lingering perfume of bruised apples falling in the forgotten orchards beyond the leaves. It is a place that was designed for the slow, gentle passage of a horse-drawn cart, not for the frightened, rushing footsteps of thousands of boys. A young man sits with his back pressed hard against the steep earthen bank of a hedgerow. He is a boy raised on the vast, sweeping plains of the American Midwest, a place where a person can see the weather changing a day before it arrives. He is used to breathing deep, open air. Here, In this narrow corridor of roots and vines, he feels as though the world is closing in around him. He pulls his knees to his chest, making himself as small as possible, trying to disappear into the dappled shade. He rests his hands on his lap. They are covered in the dark, rich soil of the bank, the dirt packed deep beneath his fingernails. He closes his eyes and tries to push away the heavy, claustrophobic walls of the lane. He imagines standing in the center of his father's wheat field, the golden stalks swaying like an ocean in the breeze, the horizon stretching away forever in a perfect, unbroken line. He imagines the wind on his face, cool and free. He holds onto that memory like a lifeline, letting the vastness of his home soothe the panicked fluttering of his heart. He reaches into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulls out a small, worn leather Bible. He does not open it to read the words. He opens it to find a single, flattened daisy, pressed perfectly between the thin, translucent pages. His mother had picked it from the garden beside their front porch on the day he left. The flower is dry and incredibly fragile, entirely faded of its color, but it still holds the faint, ghostly scent of home. He traces the delicate petals with a trembling finger, an anchor of pure, gentle love in a world made of rough bark and thorns. What he does not know, what he cannot possibly see through the impenetrable tangle of wood and leaf behind him, is that he is not alone in his fear. Less than 10 feet away, sitting with his back pressed against the exact same wall of earth on the other side of the hedgerow, is another young man. He wears a different uniform, but his knees are pulled to his chest in the exact same posture of quiet terror. He is a boy from a crowded, bustling city, a place of cobblestones and tall brick buildings. He is terrified of the silence of the countryside, terrified of the unseen rustling in the bushes, terrified of the beautiful, menacing green that surrounds him. The intimacy of the hedgerows is a strange and haunting thing. The walls of earth and root block the sight, but they do not block the sound. The boy from the plains sits perfectly still, and in the heavy, humid silence of the afternoon, he hears a sound that makes his breath catch in his throat. It is the unmistakable scrape of a metal canteen against a canvas pouch. Then, the soft, quiet sound of water being swallowed. Finally, a long, trembling exhale. He realizes, with a sudden, dropping feeling in his stomach, that the enemy is sitting right behind him. They are separated by nothing more than a few feet of dirt and tangled roots. They are so close that if the earth were made of glass, they could reach out and touch one another's hands. He sits paralyzed, listening to the boy on the other side breathe. He hears the rustle of a paper wrapper, the faint, metallic click of a lighter. A moment later, the distinct, sharp smell of cigarette smoke drifts through the leaves, mixing with the scent of the damp earth. In that moment, the terrifying, faceless enemy of the maps and the training manuals vanishes entirely. He is replaced by the profound, undeniable reality of another human being, just as tired, just as frightened, and just as desperate for a moment of quiet comfort. As the long, golden afternoon stretches on, the heat in the sunken lanes becomes oppressive. The buzzing of the bees in the wildflowers grows loud and hypnotic. The world seems to fall into a heavy, drowsy slumber. And then, the quiet is broken. It is not a loud noise. It is a small, choked cry of pain, echoing down the narrow dirt path that connects the sprawling maze of hedges. A young soldier, moving too quickly between the lines, has fallen. He lies in the dust of the lane, his leg wounded, his breath coming in short, rapid gasps. The silence that follows his cry is agonizing. It is a thick, terrifying stillness. Hundreds of young men, hidden on both sides of the green walls, hold their breath, gripping their weapons, waiting to see what will happen in the dappled sunlight of the lane. The wounded boy calls out. His voice is weak, high-pitched, and trembling with fear. He does not call out for a medic or for his sergeant. He calls out for his mother. It is a universal sound, a primitive, heartbreaking plea that cuts through the politics and the uniforms, striking directly at the soft, vulnerable core of every single man listening in the shadows. For a long minute, nothing moves. The boy cries out again, his hand clutching the dusty earth. Then, from the deep green shadows of the hedgerow on the left, a movement. A branch of a hawthorn bush is gently pushed aside. A young man, wearing a helmet adorned with a red cross, steps slowly out into the open lane. He does not carry a weapon. His hands are raised, empty and open, his palms facing the invisible watchers on the right side of the hedge. He moves with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes wide, his heart hammering against his ribs. He kneels beside the wounded boy in the dust. He unclasps his medical bag with trembling fingers. From the shadows on the right side of the lane, the opposing side, there is a rustle of leaves. The medic freezes, holding a white bandage in the air, waiting for the crack of a rifle. Instead, the leaves part. Another young man steps out into the sunlight. He wears the uniform of the enemy. He has no red cross on his helmet, but he has left his weapon leaning against a tree root behind him. He carries only his metal canteen. He walks slowly toward the center of the lane, his eyes locked on the medic. They are two boys meeting in the dusty space between worlds. When he reaches the wounded soldier, the stranger drops smoothly to his knees. He unscrews the cap of his canteen, lifts the wounded boy's head with surprising, tender gentleness, and presses the water to his pale lips. The medic watches him for a second, his eyes wide with a profound, unspoken awe. Then, he nods. He turns his attention to the wound, wrapping the clean, white cotton tightly around the leg, his hands moving quickly and surely. In the dust of the narrow lane, surrounded by the towering, ancient walls of the earth, a silent, miraculous truce has bloomed. It was not ordered by generals. It was not negotiated over a table. It was born from the simple, overwhelming realization of shared human fragility. The two boys work together in absolute silence. They hear the heavy, raspy breathing of the wounded soldier. They hear the buzzing of the flies. They feel the intense heat of the sun on the backs of their necks. When the bandage is tied, the stranger with the canteen takes a clean handkerchief from his pocket and gently wipes the sweat and the dust from the wounded boy's forehead. It is the gesture of an older brother, a touch of pure, unadulterated kindness in a place that seemed entirely devoid of it. The medic finishes his work and sits back on his heels. He looks across the wounded boy and meets the eyes of the stranger. They stare at one another for a long moment. They see the dark circles of exhaustion, the smudges of dirt, the profound, mutual terror of the green maze. They see themselves reflected in the eyes of the other. The stranger nods once, a slow, solemn dip of his head. He screws the cap back onto his canteen, stands up, and walks quietly back into the deep shadows of the hedgerow from which he came. The leaves rustle, and he is gone, swallowed completely by the earth and the vines. The medic signals to the shadows on his own side, and two more boys step out to carefully lift their wounded friend and carry him back to safety. Within minutes, the lane is empty again. The dust settles. The bees return to the wildflowers. The suffocating, quiet intimacy of the bocage resumes. But the air feels different. The heavy, terrifying tension has been pierced by a fleeting moment of grace. The boy from the plains, still sitting with his back against the earthen wall, carefully places his pressed daisy back into his Bible. He closes the leather cover and rests his hands on his knees. He listens closely to the wall of dirt behind him. He hears the faint, rhythmic breathing of the boy on the other side. He realizes that they are both just blood and bone and heartbeat, trapped in a beautiful, terrible garden, waiting for the sun to go down. As the evening finally approaches, the shadows lengthen, stretching down the narrow lanes and pooling in the hollows of the roots. The heat of the day slowly dissipates, replaced by a cool, damp chill that rises from the soil. The sky above the ribbon of leaves turns from blue to a deep, bruising purple, and then, finally, to the soft, velvety black of night. The stars appear, tiny pinpricks of silver light framed by the dark silhouettes of the oak branches. The young men on both sides of the earthen walls look up at the exact same stars. They wrap their coats tightly around their shoulders, settling into the damp earth for the night. They do not speak. They do not move. They honor the whispered truce of the afternoon, allowing the quiet night to blanket the labyrinth, finding a fragile, beautiful peace in the shared, silent dark. To step onto a shore made entirely of ash is to leave the known earth behind completely. The sand here is not the soft, golden powder of childhood summers, the kind that squishes playfully between bare toes on a warm afternoon. It is dark, coarse, and heavy, like coffee grounds mixed with crushed glass. It absorbs the heat of the sun, holding it tight, radiating a dry, unforgiving warmth. When a boot steps onto this beach, there is no solid footing. The earth simply gives way, sliding and shifting, swallowing the foot up to the ankle in a silent, suffocating embrace. To walk across this volcanic landscape is to wade through a heavy, dark ocean of dust. For the young man who waded out of the surf and onto this surreal, alien shore, the world instantly became a place of profound and disorienting strangeness. There were no green trees here to offer the gentle comfort of shade. There were no quiet streams, no singing birds, no soft grass. There was only the vast, sloping mountain of broken rock, a towering monument of ash rising silently against the pale sky, and the bitter, sharp scent of sulfur venting from deep within the earth. It smelled of matches struck in a closed room, a constant, acrid reminder that the very ground beneath them was born of fire. On the surface of this moonscape, a young man sits slumped against the side of a shallow crater. His uniform, once a crisp, clean canvas, is entirely blackened, coated in the fine, clinging volcanic grit that gets into everything, the creases of his eyes, the lines of his palms, the deep fibers of his coat. He is trying to dig a foxhole, using a small folding shovel to scoop the earth away. But the black sand defies him. With every shovelful he throws over his shoulder, the sides of the hole simply collapse, the ash pouring back down in a slow, mocking waterfall. He stops. He lets the shovel fall from his exhausted hands. The weariness he feels is absolute. It is not simply a tiredness of the muscles, it is a heavy, sinking weight that settles deep into the marrow of the bone. It is an exhaustion of the soul. He leans his head back against the unstable black earth and closes his eyes, listening to his own shallow breathing. His canteen is nearly empty. The island has no water of its own, no secret springs hidden beneath the rocks. Every drop is precious, carried from the sea, warm and tasting faintly of tin and chlorine. He unscrews the cap, his hands trembling so violently that the plastic rattles against the metal rim. He allows himself a single, tiny sip, letting the liquid pool on his dry tongue before swallowing. As he sits there, lost in the overwhelming grayness of his fatigue, he reaches into the pocket of his shirt. His fingers brush against a small, smooth piece of sea glass, pale blue and frosted by the waves, that his younger sister had pressed into his hand on the platform of a train station a lifetime ago. He turns the glass over in his dirty fingers. In this monochrome world of black sand and gray rock, that tiny shard of blue is a miracle. It is a piece of the sky, a piece of the ocean, a piece of home. He holds it tightly in his fist, resting his hand against his chest, letting the memory of his sister's bright, ringing laughter push back the crushing silence of the ash. Yet, the surface of this desolate island is only half of the story. Beneath the black sand, hidden deep inside the veins of the ancient volcano, lies a completely different world. It is a vast, suffocating labyrinth of tunnels, caves, and dark, twisting corridors carved directly into the stone. If the surface is an alien desert, the underground is a sweltering, airless tomb. Here, the heat does not come from the sun, it radiates from the earth itself. The air is stagnant, heavy with the sulfurous breath of the volcano, making every inhalation a conscious, labored effort. The darkness is absolute, a thick, physical blindfold that presses against the eyes, broken only by the dim, flickering amber glow of a rare candle or the faint beam of a dying flashlight. In the deepest corner of one of these chambers, another young man sits cross-legged on the uneven stone floor. He wears a different uniform, but it is stained with the exact same black dust. He is just as thirsty, just as exhausted, and just as impossibly far from the gentle world he knew. He is a boy who grew up in a city of paper lanterns and quiet gardens, a boy who learned to paint the delicate, sweeping branches of willow trees with a fine brush. Now, his hands are calloused, his fingernails torn, his artistic fingers trembling in the stifling dark. He is listening to the sound of water. Somewhere above him, in the porous rock of the ceiling, moisture is condensing. It gathers slowly, agonizingly, until a single, heavy drop forms and falls, hitting a small tin cup placed carefully on the floor. Plink. He waits in the pitch black. Minutes pass. Plink. It is a slow, maddening rhythm. He does not drink yet. He waits for the cup to gather enough to wet his cracked lips, exhibiting a quiet, unimaginable patience born of pure survival. While he waits, he unfolds a small, square piece of white silk. It is a 1,000-stitch belt, a Senenbari, made for him by the women of his neighborhood. He runs his thumbs over the raised red knots in the dark. He cannot see them, but he knows them by heart. He remembers the soft voices of the women, the gentle bow of his mother's head as she handed it to him. In the suffocating, sulphurous gloom, he presses the silk to his face, breathing in, hoping to catch even the faintest, ghostly scent of the cherry blossoms that bloomed outside his window. He is so incredibly tired. He leans his head against the hot, rough stone wall. The mountain presses down on him with millions of tons of rock, but the weight of his homesickness is heavier still. As the long, grueling day finally surrenders to the night, the temperature on the island undergoes a sudden, brutal shift. The heat of the sun vanishes, absorbed into the deep atmosphere, leaving the surface exposed to a biting, damp chill. The wind sweeps across the volcanic slopes, whistling through the jagged rocks with a lonely, mournful sound. The young man on the surface pulls his knees tightly to his chest, wrapping his arms around his legs to preserve whatever small warmth he can. He stares out across the dark expanse of the island. The black sand vanishes into the black night, erasing the horizon entirely. And then, in the deep, freezing quiet between the gusts of wind, he hears a sound. It is faint at first, drifting up from a hidden vent in the rocks just a few yards away. It is not the sound of machinery. It is not a call to arms. It is a voice. It is a soft, delirious, weeping murmur. The young man holds his breath, straining to listen. The voice belongs to a boy, hidden somewhere beneath the earth, who is crying out in the dark. He is speaking a language the young man on the surface does not understand, but the emotion carried in those broken syllables requires absolutely no translation. The underground boy is weeping for his mother. The tone is high, frail, and utterly stripped of pride. It is the primitive, heartbreaking cry of a frightened child lost in the dark. The young man on the surface does not reach for his weapon. He does not feel a surge of anger or fear. Instead, he feels a profound, devastating ache in the very center of his chest. His own eyes fill with sudden, hot tears, blurring the stars above him. In that fleeting, sorrowful sound, the monstrous illusion of the enemy dissolves completely. The boy on the surface realizes, with a clarity that takes his breath away, that the earth beneath him is filled with boys exactly like himself. Boys who are shivering in the dark. Boys who are terribly thirsty. Boys whose hearts are breaking with the memory of their mothers' faces. He slowly reaches his hand out and presses his palm flat against the cold, black sand. He imagines his warmth traveling down through the grains, through the rock, reaching the weeping boy in the cave below. It is a silent, desperate offering of comfort, a quiet recognition of their shared, tragic frailty. I hear you, he thinks into the dark. I know. I want to go home, too. The voice from the vent eventually fades, settling into the exhausted, fitful silence of the deep earth. The island of black sand holds them both in its indifferent embrace. It makes no distinction between the boy shivering under the stars and the boy shivering in the stone. They are bound together by the dust on their skin, by the dryness in their throats, and by the profound, beautiful love they carry for the lives they left behind. High above the alien landscape, the clouds slowly part, revealing the vast, quiet majesty of the night sky. The stars shine down on the volcanic cone, casting a pale, gentle silver light over the ash. They offer no judgment, no sides, and no borders. They simply keep watch over the sleeping island. The young man on the surface tucks his piece of blue sea glass safely back into his pocket. He rests his head against his arms, his breathing slowing to match the quiet, rhythmic sighing of the ocean wind. And as the deep night wraps the shattered earth in a blanket of peaceful, undisturbed dark, he finally closes his eyes, drifting into a quiet slumber, sharing the exact same dream of a gentle sunrise as the unseen brothers sleeping in the stone below. To fall from the sky is not a violent thing, but a slow, quiet surrender to the wind, tethered to the earth by nothing more than a fragile canopy of woven silk. Before the great leap, there was only the deafening, vibrating roar of the metal ships carrying them through the clouds. Inside the cramped, narrow belly of the aircraft, the air was thick with the smell of heavy canvas, machine oil, and the quiet, collective holding of breath. The young men sat in 2 long rows, their shoulders pressed tightly against one another, weighed down by the immense, cumbersome burden of their gear. They were completely encased in webbing, straps, and heavy wool. They looked like deep-sea divers preparing to plunge into a dark and unforgiving ocean. But when the heavy metal door finally slid open, revealing the rushing, freezing slipstream of the high altitude, the ocean they stepped into was made entirely of air. One by one, they moved to the edge of the door. There was no time to think, no time to look down. There was only the sudden, rushing wind tearing at their faces, and the breathless, terrifying step out into the absolute, echoing void. For a span of 3 heartbeats, there is only chaos. The stomach drops, the wind roars in the ears, and the world spins in a chaotic blur of blue sky and green earth. And then, there is a sharp, sudden pull across the shoulders. The silk releases. It blooms above them like a massive, white flower opening instantly in the sun. The wild rushing of the wind stops abruptly, replaced by a deep, magnificent deceleration. The heavy, falling body is caught, held firm by the thin, white suspension lines, and suddenly, the roaring chaos of the world simply vanishes. It is quiet. It is so profoundly, unimaginably quiet. Hanging beneath the wide, blossoming umbrella of the parachute, the young man experiences a sensation of total, suspended isolation. He is no longer a soldier trapped in a crowded machine. He is a solitary traveler floating through the vast, silent cathedral of the sky. The air is crisp and biting, stinging his cheeks, but the sheer, breathtaking beauty of the view numbs the cold entirely. Beneath his dangling boots, the earth is laid out like an exquisite, intricate painting. He sees the flat, emerald-green pastures, perfectly divided by silver ribbons of water. The canals catch the afternoon sunlight, glowing like polished mirrors winding their way through the countryside. He sees the tiny, geometric squares of farmhouses with their red tile roofs, and the slow, lazy turning of a windmill in the distance. From up here, the world below looks impossibly peaceful. It looks like a toy village, a place where conflict could not possibly exist. He rests his gloved hands high on the risers, feeling the gentle, rhythmic swaying of the silk catching the breeze. It is a slow, pendulum motion, rocking him back and forth in the empty air. It feels exactly like sitting in a porch swing on a lazy Sunday afternoon. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle sway soothe his racing heart. He thinks of the girl who promised to wait for him, picturing her face in the white clouds drifting past. He thinks of his mother's garden, of the way the bumblebees hummed in the lavender bushes. He is suspended halfway between the heavens and the earth, untethered from the heavy reality of the ground, wrapped in a fragile, solitary peace. Miles away, sitting in a shallow trench near a line of trees, a young sentry from the opposing side hears the distant drone of the engines. He looks up from the letter he is writing to his father. He shades his eyes against the glare of the sun. He watches the metal ships pass high overhead, and then he sees the sky begin to change. It does not look like an invasion. It looks like a sudden, miraculous snowfall. Thousands upon thousands of tiny white blossoms burst into existence against the blue canvas of the sky. They drift downward in slow, graceful arcs, catching the light, shimmering like dandelion seeds blown by a giant breath. The young sentry does not raise his rifle. He does not shout an alarm. He simply sits in the dirt, his mouth slightly open, entirely captivated by the strange, surreal majesty of the sight. He is just a boy, and the spectacle above him is so beautiful it makes his chest ache. He watches a single, solitary parachute drift slightly away from the others, catching a crossbreeze. He watches the tiny silhouette of the man hanging beneath it, swaying gently in the wind. In that quiet, mesmerized moment, the sentry feels a profound, unspoken kinship with the boy in the sky. He knows that the falling boy is frightened. He knows that the falling boy is cold. He looks at the white silk slowly descending toward the trees, and for a fleeting, stolen minute, he forgets the uniform he wears. He just wishes, with a quiet, secret part of his heart, that the boy in the sky lands softly in the grass. Down below, hidden within the walls of the small brick farmhouses, the people of the countryside are looking through their windows. For years, they have lived under the heavy, stifling blanket of occupation. They have learned to walk softly, to speak in whispers, and to keep their eyes cast down toward the cobblestones. They have lived on thin potato soup and the quiet, enduring hope that one day, the world would change. A woman stands at her kitchen sink, her hands buried in warm, soapy water. She hears the low rumble vibrating through the glass panes of her window. She dries her hands on her linen apron and steps out through the wooden back door into the small garden where her cabbages grow. She looks up. The sky is full of falling leaves. But they are not the brown and gold leaves of autumn, they are pure, brilliant white. The parachutes fill the entire horizon, a vast, silent armada drifting slowly down into her fields. She brings a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears well up in her eyes, hot and sudden, blurring the incredible sight above her. It is as if the sky itself has finally answered the millions of whispered prayers sent up from the dark over the long, weary years. She watches them fall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She feels a desperate, maternal urge to run out into the open pasture, to catch them in her arms before they hit the ground, to wrap them in thick quilts and hide them in her barn. They look so incredibly fragile, hanging there in the open air, trusting their lives to a few yards of woven thread. The descent, which feels like an eternity in the air, ends with a sudden, rushing reality. The ground rises up fast. The young paratrooper prepares for the impact, bending his knees, tucking his chin. He hits the soft, damp earth of the pasture, tumbling forward into the deep green grass. Instantly, the magic of the flight is broken. The immense canopy of silk, robbed of the wind, collapses in a great, billowing heap around him. He is suddenly trapped beneath a mountain of white fabric. It covers his face, plunging him into a soft, translucent, white darkness. He struggles, his breath coming in short, exhausted gasps. The straps of his harness are heavy and tight. He claws at the smooth, slippery fabric, fighting to find the edge, fighting to breathe the open air. The smell of the earth is overwhelming, the rich, dark scent of crushed clover, wet peat, and the loamy soil of the fields. Then, the silk is suddenly pulled away from his face. The bright afternoon sun rushes back in. He blinks, his eyes adjusting to the sudden light. Kneeling in the grass beside him is the woman from the farmhouse. She is out of breath, her wooden shoes stained with the mud of the field. She does not speak his language, and he does not speak hers. But as she looks down at him, her eyes are filled with a pure, overwhelming radiance. It is a look of absolute, unconditional salvation. She reaches out with a gentle, weathered hand and helps him push the heavy folds of the parachute off his chest. Her touch is soft, a mother's touch, instantly grounding him, telling him that he has survived the fall. He lies back in the grass for a second, looking up at her, the adrenaline slowly draining from his tired limbs. She reaches deep into the pocket of her apron and pulls out a single, small apple. It is slightly bruised, saved carefully from the last meager harvest. She presses it into his dirty, trembling hand. He looks at the apple. Then he looks at her face. He nods, a slow, deep gesture of profound gratitude. He takes a bite. The sharp, sweet juice bursts on his tongue, a taste so vivid and real it brings tears to his eyes. It is the taste of the earth, the taste of kindness, the taste of life continuing despite the shadows. Together, in the quiet of the pasture, they begin to gather the silk. They pull the long, white suspension lines, gathering the vast expanse of the canopy into their arms. The fabric is incredibly soft, light as a feather, cool against the skin. It billows and whispers in the breeze as they fold it together. In the midst of the vast, churning machinery of the era, this is a moment of profound, quiet domesticity. A tired boy from across the ocean and a weary mother from the countryside, standing in a quiet field, folding laundry in the sun. This white silk, born for a singular, terrifying purpose, will not be discarded. Long after the echoes of the era have faded, this fabric will find a new, beautiful life. The woman will hide it carefully beneath the floorboards of her home. Years later, in a time of peace, when the fields are quiet and the sky is empty of falling men, she will pull the silk from its hiding place. She will sit by the light of a window, her needle flashing silver in the sun, and she will cut the soft, white canopy. She will sew it into a christening gown for her first grandchild. She will sew it into a wedding dress for a young bride walking down the aisle of a village church. The fabric that once carried a frightened boy down from the freezing sky will be transformed into a symbol of new life, of love, and of a future they all dreamed of in the dark. As the evening begins to settle over the Normandy countryside, the light softens into a deep, hazy gold. The shadows of the hedgerows stretch long across the pastures. The young paratrooper sits in the hayloft of the woman's barn, hidden safely in the sweet-smelling dark. He rests his head against his canvas pack. He is utterly exhausted, his body aching from the heavy shock of the landing. But as he listens to the quiet sounds of the farm, the soft lowing of a cow in the stall below, the gentle rustle of a mouse in the straw, the comforting, rhythmic ticking of a clock in the distant kitchen, he feels a deep, settling peace. He reaches into his pocket and touches the core of the small apple. He thinks of the vast, quiet sky he floated through, and the gentle hands that pulled the silk from his face. Outside, the first stars begin to appear in the twilight, shining down on the empty fields, on the quiet canals, and on the thousands of young men resting in the shadows. The sky is calm again. The wind whispers softly through the eaves of the barn, a gentle, soothing lullaby for the boys who fell from the clouds, offering them a quiet, undisturbed sleep before the rising of the sun. The forest did not just freeze, it simply held its breath, wrapping the world in a heavy, pristine blanket of silver and white. Before the heavy footsteps of history marched into these ancient woods, the forest was a place of quiet majesty. It was a dense, sprawling cathedral of towering pine, dark fir, and ancient oak, a place where the light filtered down through the canopy in soft, emerald beams. But as the deep winter settled over the hills, the landscape underwent a profound and beautiful transformation. The snow began to fall, not as a flurry, but as a steady, relentless curtain of pure white. It fell for days, covering the dark earth, burying the underbrush, and turning the sweeping branches of the evergreen trees into heavy, sweeping arches of frost. To stand in the center of this frozen forest was to step into a realm of absolute, ringing silence. The snow possessed a quiet magic. It acted as a vast, natural blanket, absorbing every echo, every sharp noise, leaving behind a hush so deep you could hear the sound of a single, dry pine needle dropping to the ground. The air was incredibly crisp, smelling intensely of crushed resin, damp bark, and the sharp, clean scent of the ozone. It was a breathtaking, terrifyingly beautiful winter wonderland. Yet, For the young men forced to live beneath the roots of these ancient trees, the winter was a heavy, physical burden. There were boys who had grown up in warm houses with thick walls, boys who were used to the comforting hiss of a radiator or the crackle of a hearth fire. Now, they were suspended in a world made entirely of ice. They lived in shallow holes dug desperately into the frozen earth, the ground so hard it had to be chipped away inch by agonizing inch. In one of these narrow, snow-lined hollows, 3 young soldiers sit pressed tightly together. The temperature has plummeted so far below freezing that the very air feels brittle, as if it might shatter like glass. They are draped in everything they own, layers of stiff, freezing canvas, thin wool sweaters, and a single, frost-covered blanket pulled over their heads to trap the meager, fading warmth of their own breath. The boy in the middle is shivering with a slow, deep rhythm that he cannot control. He rests his head on the shoulder of the boy beside him. They do not speak. The cold has stolen their words, making the simple act of opening their mouths feel like inhaling tiny, sharp diamonds. Instead, they communicate through the language of survival. The boy on the left reaches into his deep coat pocket with clumsy, numb fingers and withdraws a tiny, foil-wrapped square. It is a piece of dark chocolate, saved for weeks, carrying the faint scent of cocoa and home. He peels the silver foil back slowly, the crinkle sounding incredibly loud in the muffled quiet of the woods. He breaks the small square into 3 uneven pieces. He hands one to the shivering boy in the middle, and one to the boy on his right. They place the chocolate on their tongues, closing their eyes, letting it melt agonizingly slowly. In the vast, freezing misery of the forest, that tiny burst of sweetness is a miracle. It is a fleeting, radiant reminder of a world that is soft, and warm, and kind. The boy in the middle lets the chocolate dissolve, and as he does, he lets his mind drift away from the snow. He imagines his mother's kitchen on a Sunday morning. He pictures the steam rising from a porcelain teacup, the golden crust of a freshly baked loaf of bread sitting on the wooden table, and the frost melting on the inside of the window pane. He can almost feel the gentle, ambient heat of the stove radiating against his back. He holds onto that memory with a desperate, quiet strength, using it as a shield against the biting wind that sweeps through the upper branches of the pines. He pulls his collar up higher around his ears. Hidden deep inside his shirt, pressed flat against his chest, is a letter from his father. It is too cold to take it out and read it, but he does not need to. He knows the shape of the ink, the familiar, comforting slope of the handwriting. His father wrote about the heavy snow back home, about how the old pine tree in the front yard was bowing under the weight of the white flakes. It is a strange, haunting comfort to know that the exact same snow falling on his shoulders is falling on the roof of his childhood home. He presses his hand over the letter, feeling a faint flutter of a heartbeat beneath the wool, and finds a tiny, glowing ember of peace in the dark. Just a short distance away, separated by a thin veil of snow-draped trees and an invisible line drawn on a map, another group of boys is huddled in the exact same kind of freezing hole. They wear coats of a different color, and the helmets resting in the snow beside them are a different shape. But the forest does not care about the colors of men. The frost clings to their eyelashes in the exact same way. Their breath blooms into identical white clouds in the freezing air. One of these boys, a teenager who worked in a quiet bakery before the world broke apart, is blowing gently into his cupped hands. His skin is pale, his knuckles raw and red from the cold. He is staring out into the dark, watching the snow drift lazily down through the branches. He misses his family with a physical ache that rivals the cold. He misses the smell of yeast, the warmth of the ovens, the sound of his younger sister singing as she swept the flour from the floorboards. He leans his head back against the frozen root of an oak tree. He does not hate the boys sitting in the woods across from him. He does not even know them. He only knows that he is incredibly tired, that his feet are completely numb, and that he wishes, more than anything else in the entire universe, that he could just go to sleep in a warm bed. He feels a profound, silent solidarity with the unseen strangers shivering in the dark just beyond the trees. He knows they are looking up at the exact same stars, wishing for the exact same things. As the long, agonizing day surrenders to the night, the heavy clouds that have choked the sky finally begin to tear apart. The snowfall slows to a gentle, whispering drift, and the moon emerges. It is a brilliant, full winter moon, glowing with a cold, pale light. It casts long, blue shadows across the snowdrifts, illuminating the forest in a breathtaking, ghostly silver wash. The wind dies down entirely, leaving the woods in a state of absolute, perfect stillness. It is the night before Christmas. In the homes they left behind, candles are being lit in windows. Small, humble pine trees are being decorated with paper ornaments and strung with popcorn. Children are being tucked into beds, their heads filled with dreams of peace and gentle surprises. But here, in the frozen woods, there are no candles. There are no ornaments. There is only the moon, the snow, and the terrible, biting cold. Then, something miraculous happens in the dark. It begins as a faint, trembling hum. The young boy from the bakery, huddled against the oak root, closes his eyes and begins to sing softly under his breath. He is trying to comfort himself, trying to conjure the warmth of his village church. Still Nacht, Heilige Nacht. His voice is quiet at first, frail and shivering in the freezing air. But as he sings, the boys sitting beside him in the snow slowly lift their heads. One by one, they join in. Their voices, thick with emotion and exhaustion, blend together, rising up out of the shallow foxhole. The melody floats through the heavy, snow-laden branches of the pine trees. It is a slow, mournful, and unimaginably beautiful sound, carrying across the silent, moonlit expanse of the forest. Across the invisible line, the three boys sharing the chocolate hear the faint, ghostly music drifting through the woods. The boy in the middle opens his eyes. He holds his breath, straining to listen. At first, he thinks it is the wind playing tricks on his tired mind. But the melody is unmistakable. It is a song he has known since he was a child. He knows every note, every gentle rise and fall of the tune. He does not reach for his rifle. None of them do. They sit perfectly still in the snow, mesmerized by the beautiful, impossible sound of the enemy singing a lullaby in the dark. The fear, the tension, the bitter reality of the winter all seem to melt away in the presence of that gentle music. When the first verse ends, a profound, ringing silence falls over the woods once more. The German boys wait in the dark, their breath pluming in the silver light. And then, from the American lines, a single, clear voice rings out in the freezing night. Silent night, holy night. It is the boy who held the letter from his father. He sings the words in his own language, his voice steady and bright, carrying across the snowdrifts. Soon, the boys sitting beside him join in, their harmonies weaving through the frozen branches, reaching out to the unseen strangers hiding in the dark. All is calm, all is bright. In the center of the frozen, broken world, a magnificent, invisible bridge has been built entirely of song. The melody drifts back and forth across the lines, two different languages singing the exact same prayer for peace. For a few fleeting, glorious minutes, the war ceases to exist. There are no armies in the Ardennes forest tonight. There are only frightened, lonely young men, sitting in the snow, missing their mothers, and holding on to the simple, radiant beauty of a Christmas carol. They sing for the warmth they cannot feel. They sing for the families they cannot see. They sing for the shared, undeniable humanity that connects them all, no matter the color of their coats or the flags they were told to carry. When the final, haunting note fades away, melting gently into the vast, snowy silence, it leaves behind a profound and lasting peace. The woods are still once more. No shots are fired that night. The unspoken, musical truce holds firm beneath the silver light of the moon. The boys on both sides settle back down into their icy beds, pulling their thin blankets up to their chins. But the cold does not feel quite as sharp as it did before. A tiny, glowing warmth has been ignited in the center of their chests. They have recognized themselves in the voices of the strangers in the dark. They have shared a beautiful, transcendent moment of grace in a place that seemed completely abandoned by it. The moon slowly arcs across the winter sky, casting its peaceful light over the sleeping forest. The clouds begin to gather once more, and the soft, white flakes of snow resume their gentle descent. The snow falls on the pine needles, on the frozen earth, and on the sleeping faces of the young men. It falls quietly, endlessly, blanketing the forest in a pure, sweeping white, holding them all safe and peaceful in the magical, silent embrace of the frozen woods. A home does not vanish all at once, it exhales its memories slowly into the settling dust. When the heavy, terrible thunder of the era finally rolled past the cities of Europe, it left behind a silence that was unlike any other. It was not the peaceful, ancient quiet of the deep woods, nor the rhythmic, rushing calm of the open ocean. It was the breathless, suspended stillness of a world that had been turned entirely inside out. To walk through these urban ruins was to wander through a surreal, waking dream, where the most intimate, hidden spaces of civilian life were suddenly, heartbreakingly exposed to the open sky. The streets were no longer paved with cobblestones, but with a thick, soft carpet of pulverized brick, shattered glass, and pale, gray plaster. As the young men in their dusty uniforms walked slowly down these unrecognizable avenues, their heavy boots made a muffled, crunching sound that echoed off the skeletal remains of the buildings. The air smelled of old wood smoke, damp ash, and the faint, lingering scent of broken perfume bottles and crushed tea leaves. If you were to look up, you would see the strange, impossible geometry of the broken city. Entire facades of apartment buildings had been sheared away, leaving the interior rooms perfectly visible, like a child's dollhouse open to the wind. A staircase climbs up a brick wall, leading to a door that opens into empty space. On the third floor of a ruined townhouse, a piece of floral wallpaper flaps gently in the breeze. A framed mirror hangs miraculously unbroken on a solitary wall, reflecting nothing but the drifting clouds. For the young soldiers moving through this landscape, the sight of these ruined homes brought a profound and heavy ache to their chests. They had spent years sleeping in muddy trenches and shivering in dark forests, dreaming constantly of the warm, safe sanctuary of a home. Now, they were surrounded by thousands of homes, all of them broken, all of their protective magic stripped away. A young man steps carefully over a pile of rubble and enters what used to be a ground-floor kitchen. The roof is gone, replaced by the vast, indifferent blue of the afternoon sky. He takes off his heavy steel helmet, holding it by his side, instinctively showing reverence for the ghost of the family that once lived here. The floor is covered in a fine layer of white dust, undisturbed except for the small, delicate tracks of a stray cat. In the center of the room, standing amidst the fallen beams and the ash, is a sturdy wooden table. Resting on the table is a single, delicate porcelain teacup and a small saucer. It sits exactly where it was placed on some forgotten morning, waiting patiently for a hand that never returned to pick it up. The young soldier reaches out with a dirty, calloused finger and gently traces the gold rim of the cup. He imagines the woman who sat here, listening to the radio, watching the morning light stream through a window that no longer exists. He thinks of his own mother's kitchen, of the small, everyday rituals of peace that anchor a human life. He does not touch the cup again. He leaves it there, a tiny, fragile monument to the quiet beauty of the ordinary. As he steps back out into the ruined street, a sound drifts through the dusty air. It is so unexpected, so entirely out of place in this landscape of destruction, that he stops completely in his tracks. It is the sound of a piano. The notes are slow, hesitant, and breathtakingly clear. They ring out through the hollow avenues, echoing off the broken brickwork, cutting through the heavy silence like a shaft of pure, golden light. The young man follows the sound, stepping softly, drawn by the invisible thread of the melody. He turns a corner and looks into the exposed parlor of a grand, ruined house. The floor is entirely covered in debris, the elegant velvet curtains torn and gray with ash. But tucked into the corner of the room, miraculously spared by the falling roof, is an upright piano. Sitting on a cracked wooden stool in front of the keys is a soldier. He wears the uniform of the opposing side. His coat is covered in the same gray dust, his shoulders slumped with the exact same, bone-deep exhaustion. He is a boy who, in a different life, used to study at a conservatory, filling his days with sonatas and nocturnes. Now, his hands are trembling, wrapped in dirty bandages, his fingernails chipped and black with soot. He gently wipes the plaster dust from the ivory keys with the sleeve of his coat. He closes his eyes, takes a slow, shaky breath, and begins to play. He does not play a marching song. He does not play a victory anthem. He plays a gentle, melancholic folk song from his childhood, a lullaby about a river winding through a green valley. The music is incredibly soft, played with a tender, desperate reverence. It rises up from the ruins, floating over the shattered roofs and the empty streets. The first soldier stands in the shadow of the doorway, his rifle lowered, simply listening. He feels a sudden, hot lump rise in his throat. The music speaks a language that requires no translation. It speaks of terrible loss, of unbearable weariness, and of a desperate, lingering hope for peace. For those 3 magnificent minutes, the broken city is repaired. The war is completely forgotten. There is only the beautiful, fragile sound of the piano, and 2 young men from different worlds, standing in the dust, sharing a profound and secret communion of the soul. When the final note fades, melting gently into the quiet afternoon air, the boy at the piano lowers his hands to his lap. He keeps his eyes closed for a moment longer, holding onto the memory of the music. The soldier in the doorway does not speak. He does not make a sound. He simply turns and walks quietly away, leaving the boy to his sanctuary, carrying the warmth of that melody like a precious ember in his chest. Wandering deeper into the labyrinth of the city, the true casualties of the era reveal themselves not in grand monuments, but in the small, forgotten corners of the rubble. Another young man, a farmer's son with broad shoulders and tired eyes, finds a place to rest on a crumbled garden wall. He unhooks his heavy pack, letting it drop to the dusty ground with a soft thud. He is so tired that his hands shake as he reaches into his pocket to retrieve his meager ration, a small tin of preserved meat and a hard, dry biscuit. As he struggles to open the tin, he hears a soft, scraping sound. He looks up. Emerging from the dark shadows of a collapsed cellar is a dog. It is a small, wire-haired terrier, its coat matted with gray dust and dried mud. It is impossibly thin, its ribs showing clearly against its flanks, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. The dog stops a few feet away, its dark eyes fixed on the small tin in the soldier's hand. It is trembling violently, terrified of the loud noises and the heavy boots that have destroyed its world, but driven forward by a desperate, agonizing hunger. The young soldier freezes. Back home, he had a dog just like this one, a scruffy little terrier that used to sleep at the foot of his bed and follow him through the tall grass of the pastures. He looks at the stray, his heart breaking at the sight of its quiet suffering. He speaks in a soft, low whisper, the same gentle tone he used to calm the horses in his father's barn. "It's all right," he murmurs, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "It's okay, little one." He uses his pocket knife to pry the lid off the tin. The smell of the meat fills the air. The dog takes one hesitant, trembling step forward, its nose twitching. The soldier does not throw the food. He knows that sudden movements will only frighten the creature more. Instead, he cuts a small, generous piece of the meat, rests it on the flat of his palm, and slowly, carefully extends his hand. The dog hesitates. It looks at the soldier's face, searching the exhausted, dirt-streaked eyes for any sign of cruelty. Finding none, it creeps forward, its belly low to the ground. It stretches its neck out, its wet nose brushing against the soldier's calloused palm. With extraordinary gentleness, it takes the meat, chewing quickly before looking up, asking silently for more. The soldier smiles, a genuine, warm expression that cracks the layer of dust on his cheeks. He feeds the dog the entire tin, piece by piece, ignoring his own profound hunger. He breaks the hard biscuit into small crumbs, letting the dog lick them from his hand. When the food is gone, the dog does not run away. It steps closer, resting its small, dusty chin on the soldier's knee, letting out a long, quiet sigh. The young man reaches down and gently strokes the dog's head, feeling the soft ears and the coarse, dusty fur. In a world that has been entirely consumed by massive, indifferent machinery, this small, uncomplicated act of kindness is a profound rebellion. It is a reminder that his capacity for love, for nurturing, and for gentle compassion has not been destroyed by the ruins around him. He sits on the broken wall, petting the stray dog, feeling a deep, abiding connection to the innocent, fragile things of the earth. As the afternoon light begins to wane, the setting sun casts a deep, golden glow over the broken skyline. The dust in the air catches the light, turning the atmosphere into a luminous, hazy amber. It makes the ruins look strangely beautiful, like an ancient, forgotten city resting in the twilight. Walking back toward his camp, a soldier spots a piece of paper fluttering in the debris. He bends down and picks it up. It is a photograph, the edges singed and curled by fire. He brushes the ash away with his thumb. It is a picture of a family standing in front of a bakery. A mother, a father, and two small children, smiling brightly at the camera, wearing their Sunday best. The sign above the door is written in the language of the enemy. The soldier looks at the faces in the photograph. He sees the pride in the father's posture, the gentle way the mother's hand rests on her daughter's shoulder. He realizes, with a quiet, overwhelming clarity, that this city was not just a point on a map. It was a million overlapping universes of love, of hope, of scraped knees and birthday cakes, of arguments and forgiveness. He holds the photograph delicately, treating it with the utmost respect. He cannot rebuild their bakery. He cannot put the roof back on their home. But he can bear witness to their lives. He carefully folds the photograph and tucks it into his own pocket, placing it right next to the picture of his own family. He understands now that the dust settling over the city is not just pulverized stone. It is the remnants of ordinary, beautiful lives, scattered to the wind. The sun finally dips below the horizon, pulling a cool, deep purple twilight over the skeletal buildings. The wind dies down, and the vast, profound silence returns to the urban ruins. But it is no longer a silence of emptiness. It is a silence of rest. The young men find places to sleep among the fallen bricks, wrapping themselves in their heavy coats. The boy with the piano closes the cover over the keys and rests his head against the polished wood. The soldier on the garden wall curls up, feeling the small, warm weight of the stray dog sleeping soundly against his side. And as the first stars begin to shine through the exposed rafters and the empty window frames, the dust finally settles in the dark, blanketing the broken world in a quiet, forgiving, and gentle peace. The rain did not fall to punish the earth, but to wash it gently clean, a heavy, endless curtain of water drawing the weary world to a quiet close. It began as a subtle shift in the wind, a warm, heavy breath blowing in from the vast, dark expanse of the Philippine Sea. The sky, which had been bright and glaring, slowly bruised into deep shades of violet, indigo, and a soft, melancholic gray. And then, the monsoon arrived. It was not a violent, crashing storm, but a profound and steady weeping of the heavens. The rain fell in thick, warm sheets, a constant, murmuring downpour that blurred the edges of the world and turned the jagged, coral landscape of the island into a soft, watercolor painting of ash and mud. For the young men who had journeyed to this distant shore, the arrival of the monsoon was like the final, heavy sigh of a very long year. They had been walking, and hiding, and surviving for so long that their bodies had simply forgotten what it felt like to be rested. This was a weariness that went far beyond tired muscles or aching feet. It was a profound, settling exhaustion of the human soul. They were hollowed out by the noise, the fear, and the sheer, overwhelming distance from the homes they loved. But as the plum rains began to fall, drumming a soft, hypnotic rhythm against the earth, a strange and beautiful quiet settled over the island. The heavy machinery of the era, the great steel engines and the roaring metal, simply could not function in the deep, red mud. The earth softened, turning into a thick, clinging clay that held everything in place. The rushing and the running finally stopped. The world was forced to slow down, to sit still, and to listen to the gentle, rushing sound of the water. In a shallow trench carved into the side of a sloping hill, a young man sits with his knees pulled tightly to his chest. He wears a dark green poncho, the thick, rubberized canvas draped over his helmet like a small, personal tent. The rain falls against the canvas with a steady, pattering sound, thrum, thrum, thrum. It is a perfectly rhythmic, isolating noise that drowns out the rest of the world, leaving him alone in a tiny, private sanctuary of thought. He is incredibly dirty, his hands and face coated in the pale, chalky dust of the coral and the dark red earth of the ridges. He holds his hands out beyond the edge of his poncho, palms upturned, letting the heavy, warm raindrops fall onto his skin. He watches, mesmerized, as the water pools in his cupped hands, swirling with the dirt before overflowing and spilling clear through his fingers. He is not gathering the water to drink. He is simply washing his hands. It is an act of profound, quiet dignity. He rubs his thumbs over his knuckles, feeling the grit slowly wash away, revealing the pale, wrinkled skin beneath. In that simple, domestic motion, he is transported thousands of miles away. He closes his tired eyes and listens to the rain, letting it transform in his mind. It is no longer the monsoon of a foreign island. It is the gentle, summer rain falling on the tin roof of his grandfather's porch in the deep, green hills of home. He can smell the wet grass. He can hear the low, comforting creak of a rocking chair, the soft hum of the radio playing in the kitchen, and the muffled, cheerful sound of his mother humming as she sets the table for supper. The rain washing over his hands is a blessing, a gentle, cooling touch that cleanses not just the mud from his skin, but the heavy, dark weariness from his heart. He leaves his hands out in the rain, breathing in the scent of the wet earth, wrapped in a fragile, beautiful daydream of peace. Across the valley, hidden deep within the porous, ancient limestone of the island, another young man sits in the dark. He is sheltered from the direct downpour, but the cave breathes with the moisture of the monsoon. The walls weep silently, tiny rivulets of water tracing slow paths down the moss-covered rock. The air is thick and cool, smelling of damp stone, old roots, and the faint, sweet scent of crushed ferns. He sits on a woven straw mat, his posture slumped, his chin resting softly on his chest. He is a boy who was raised in a village where the passing of the seasons was marked by quiet, beautiful rituals. As he listens to the rhythmic plink, plink, plink of the water dripping from the ceiling into a small tin bowl, his mind travels back to the late days of summer in his childhood. He remembers the Oban festival, the time when the spirits of the ancestors return home. He pictures the dark, slow-moving water of the river that wound through his town. In his mind, he sees hundreds of small, delicate paper lanterns, glowing with soft, amber candlelight, floating gently down the current. They were offerings of love, tiny beacons of warmth drifting into the quiet night to guide the wandering souls toward peace. Here, in the damp, lonely dark of the cave, he feels like a wandering soul himself. He reaches into the fold of his tunic and pulls out a small, incredibly fragile piece of paper. It is a drawing his younger sister made for him before he boarded the train. It is a simple, childlike sketch of their house, a smiling sun, and a single, blooming cherry tree. The edges of the paper are soft and damp from the humidity of the jungle. He holds it with the utmost reverence, as if holding a moth by its wings. He cannot see the drawing in the pitch black of the cave, but he traces the invisible lines with his fingertip. He holds the memory of those paper lanterns in his heart, projecting their warm, golden light onto the dark walls of the limestone. He does not wish for victory. He does not wish for glory. He simply wishes, with a profound, aching desperation, that he could fold a lantern of his own, set it on the water, and follow it all the way back to his mother's open door. As the monsoon continues its slow, majestic sweep across the island, a remarkable, unspoken feeling begins to settle over the hundreds of thousands of men trapped in the mud. It is the deep, collective realization that the end is finally drawing near. The great, terrible storm of the era has spent its fury, and all that is left is the rain. When the young men look out through the gray, misty sheets of water, they no longer scan the horizon with fear. They look out with a heavy, hollow longing. The boy under the canvas poncho and the boy deep in the limestone cave are feeling the exact same, overwhelming emotion. They are simply done. The human heart can only carry so much weight before it longs to be set down. If you could somehow peel back the rain and the uniforms, if you could place these two exhausted boys face to face in the center of the muddy valley, there would be no struggle. There would be no raised voices. They would simply look at one another, seeing the identical, dark circles beneath their eyes, the identical trembling of their hands. They would sit down in the red clay together, shoulder to shoulder, and they would finally, blissfully, just go to sleep. The desire for the guns to simply stop is so loud it is almost a physical sound. It is a prayer whispered into the collars of wet coats. It is a plea written in the mud with the toe of a boot. Let it end. Let it be quiet. Let us go home. In the late afternoon, the heavy, gray clouds thin just enough to let a pale, diffuse silver light filter down through the rain. It is not sunshine, but it is a softening of the gloom. A medic, his uniform thoroughly soaked, his boots heavy with pounds of clinging clay, slowly makes his way down a secure path behind the lines. He is carrying a wooden crate of fresh rations. He passes a group of young soldiers huddled beneath the broad, waxy leaves of a massive banyan tree. They are sharing a single, damp cigarette, passing it carefully from hand to hand, sheltering the tiny orange cherry from the falling drops. The medic stops and reaches into his crate. He pulls out a few small, foil-wrapped hard candies, lemon and cherry. He steps softly under the canopy of the tree and holds out his hand. The boys look up, their faces streaked with rain and dirt. They take the candies with quiet, reverent nods, unwrapping them with slow, deliberate care. The taste of the sweet fruit is a startling, bright burst of color in a world that has been entirely gray and red for weeks. One of the boys, a tall teenager from a snowy northern town, closes his eyes and smiles. It is a small, fragile smile, but it changes his entire face, erasing the weary soldier and revealing the gentle child beneath. The medic touches the boy lightly on the shoulder, a silent promise that the world has not entirely forgotten how to be kind. The evening eventually falls, not by the setting of the sun, but by a slow, deepening darkening of the rain. The silver light fades back to violet, and then to a profound, ink-black night. The monsoon does not relent. It continues its steady, rushing song, a vast, natural lullaby that blankets the entire island. It washes over the broken trees, the empty coral ridges, and the thousands of tired boys resting in the earth. The boy in the trench pulls his poncho a little tighter around his shoulders, resting his head against his knees. The boy in the cave carefully tucks his sisters drawing back into his tunic, lying down on the woven mat. They listen to the water. It is the sound of the earth healing itself, the sound of the dirt being washed away, the sound of the air slowly, finally running out of breath. They let the rhythm of the rain match the slow beating of their hearts. And wrapped in the dark, heavy warmth of the monsoon, beneath the invisible, guiding light of 1,000 imagined lanterns, they close their heavy eyes, surrendering to the quiet, dreaming of a morning where the only sound in the world is the gentle dripping of the rain on the leaves. The loudest sound an entire generation ever heard was the sudden, breathtaking absence of noise. For years, the world had been defined by a constant, inescapable vibration. It was a heavy, mechanical hum that settled deep into the bones, the drone of engines high above the clouds, the distant, rhythmic thud of artillery rolling across the horizon like a permanent summer storm, the grinding of metal tracks, and the shrill, mournful wail of sirens. It was a noise that never truly stopped, a heavy blanket of sound that wrapped itself around every waking moment and bled into every fitful dream. And then, on a completely ordinary afternoon, under a sky that looked exactly the same as the sky the day before, the noise simply vanished. The order did not come as a great, echoing shout. It traveled down the weary lines like a gentle breeze passing through a field of tall grass. It was passed from mouth to ear, a hushed, disbelieving whisper carried on cracked lips. It's over. Stop. It is finally over. When the last engine was cut, when the final echo of the rumbling earth faded into the distance, what rushed in to fill the space was a silence so vast, so profound, and so incredibly loud that it made the ears ring. If you were to stand in a muddy field on that miraculous day, the very first thing you would notice was the sudden, startling return of the natural world. A young man, standing waist-deep in a trench he had dug with his own blistered hands, slowly raises his head. For the first time in as long as he can remember, he hears the wind. He hears it rustling through the leaves of a shattered oak tree nearby. He hears the soft, delicate chirping of a single, solitary sparrow that has returned to a broken branch. He hears the gentle, rhythmic sound of his own breathing. He stands perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs, terrified that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile glass of this newborn peace. He looks down at his hands. For years, his hands have been curled tightly around the cold, heavy wood and steel of his rifle. The weapon has become an extension of his own body, a permanent weight anchoring him to the terror of the world. Slowly, deliberately, as if waking from a deep and terrible trance, he opens his fingers. The rifle slips from his grasp. It falls into the soft earth with a dull, anticlimactic thud. He stares at his empty hands. The palms are calloused, stained with grease and the dark soil of a foreign land, but they are suddenly light. They are just hands again. They are hands meant for holding a steering wheel, for turning the pages of a book, for lifting a child into the air. He flexes his fingers, marveling at the sheer, impossible freedom of the empty space between them. A single tear escapes his eye, cutting a clean path through the dust on his cheek, falling silently into the mud at his feet. Across that very same field, hidden behind a crumbling stone wall, another boy is experiencing the exact same, earth-shattering realization. He wears the uniform of the enemy, a heavy coat that has not been warm in months. He hears the quiet, and he does not trust it. He presses his back against the rough stones, waiting for the illusion to break, waiting for the noise to return. But the minutes stretch on, long and golden in the afternoon light, and the silence holds. With trembling knees, he does something he has trained himself never to do. He stands up. He rises slowly, inch by inch, lifting his head above the top of the ruined wall. He exposes his shoulders, his chest, his face to the open air. He closes his eyes and waits for the end. But the air does not bite. The sky does not fall. There is only the cool, gentle breeze brushing against his skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and crushed wildflowers. He opens his eyes and looks out across the clearing. In the distance, he sees other figures slowly rising from the earth. They look like ghosts emerging from the shadows, tentative, exhausted, and incredibly vulnerable. They are not charging. They are not hiding. They are just standing in the open, blinking in the sunlight, looking at a world that is suddenly, miraculously, not trying to harm them. As the afternoon light begins to soften, melting into the deep, bruised purples and burnt oranges of twilight, a profound and surreal calmness settles over the broken landscapes. A young soldier, sitting on the running board of a silent truck, reaches deep into the pocket of his tunic. His fingers are shaking so badly he can barely grasp the small, crushed paper box he finds there. He pulls out a single, slightly bent cigarette and a solitary wooden match. For years, the simple act of striking a match in the open was an invitation to the dark. A flame was a beacon, a target, a deadly mistake. The night had belonged entirely to the shadows. He places the cigarette between his dry lips. He rests the match against the rough side of the box. He hesitates. The old fear is still there, a deep, primal instinct warning him to stay hidden. But then, he looks up at the vast, darkening sky. The stars are just beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of silver light. The world is quiet. He strikes the match. The sharp, sudden hiss of the sulfur is startlingly loud. The tiny flame blooms, a brilliant, warm, dancing orange light in the gathering dusk. Cupping his hands around it out of pure habit, he brings the flame to his face, illuminating the exhaustion, the dirt, and the wide, disbelieving wonder in his eyes. He inhales, the tip of the cigarette glowing cherry red. And then, he slowly, deliberately opens his hands. He lets the flame burn openly in the twilight. He drops his hands to his lap, sitting perfectly upright, letting the small light shine out into the clearing for anyone to see. He takes a long, slow drag, and exhales a plume of pale blue smoke that curls lazily up toward the stars. It is an act of breathtaking defiance against the fear he has lived with for so long. It is a quiet, beautiful declaration of survival. From across the clearing, out of the gathering shadows, another figure slowly approaches. It is a boy from the other side. His uniform is different, but his face is painted with the exact same exhaustion. He stops a few paces away. He does not carry a weapon. He raises a trembling hand, pointing a dirty finger at the glowing end of the cigarette, offering a small, silent, questioning nod. The first boy looks at him. The grand narratives of empires, the harsh words of distant leaders, the bitter divisions of the map, they all dissolve entirely in the soft glow of that single match. There is no enemy standing before him. There is only another boy who is incredibly tired, a boy who just wants to sit in the quiet and breathe. The soldier on the running board reaches into his pocket, pulls out his crushed box, and offers the stranger a cigarette. He strikes another match. The flare of light catches both their faces. They lean in together, separated by mere inches, sharing the tiny flame in the dark. They sit side by side on the metal step of the truck. They do not speak. They do not need to. They simply smoke in the twilight, listening to the crickets beginning to sing in the tall grass, sharing the profound, overwhelming weight of the silence. As the reality of the moment begins to sink deeper into the marrow of their bones, a new, completely terrifying, and entirely beautiful thought begins to rush into their minds. Tomorrow. For years, there was no tomorrow. There was only the next hour, the next ridge, the next breath. The future was a locked door, too painful to look at, too dangerous to dream about. But now, in the ringing silence of the evening, that door swings wide open, and the light of 1,000 ordinary, beautiful things comes flooding in. A boy sitting in a ruined town square pulls his knees to his chest and buries his face in his arms. The tears come suddenly, hot and fast, shaking his entire frame. He is not weeping out of sorrow. He is weeping because he just realized that he is going to see his mother again. He can see her so clearly in his mind. He can see her standing by the kitchen sink, wiping her hands on her apron. He can see the exact pattern of the floral wallpaper in the hallway. He can hear the squeak of the third step on the staircase. He realizes that he is going to walk up that path, open that front door, and step back into the life he thought he had lost forever. The sheer, crushing relief of it is too much to bear. He weeps into his dirty sleeves, his shoulders heaving, letting years of terror simply wash away into the dust. All across the world, in deep forests, on sandy beaches, and shattered cities, and on the decks of silent ships, young men are reaching into their pockets. They are pulling out the letters they have carried like sacred relics. They are unfolding the photographs of sweethearts with ribbons in their hair, of fathers standing proudly by motorcars, of younger brothers smiling missing-tooth smiles. They trace the faces in the photographs with clean, unburdened hands. They do not have to imagine these faces anymore. They are going to see them. They are going to touch them. They are going to sit on front porches in the evening. They are going to drink cold lemonade from glass pitchers. They are going to sleep in soft beds with clean, white sheets. The world has suddenly been given back to them. The night fully deepens, wrapping the earth in a velvet, compassionate dark. There are no searchlights sweeping the clouds. There are no sudden flashes of violence on the horizon. There is only the moon, full and heavy and pale, casting a gentle, silver light over the sleeping fields. The young men do not sleep right away. They lie on their backs on the hoods of trucks, on the soft grass, on the decks of ships, and they look up at the stars. The universe feels different tonight. It feels benevolent. It feels as though the stars are shining just a little bit brighter, welcoming them back to the realm of the living. The silence continues to ring in their ears, a loud, beautiful, and healing song. It is the sound of the world taking a long, deep, and shuddering breath. It is the sound of millions of hearts beating a little bit slower, a little bit steadier. They wrap their coats around themselves, not out of desperation, but simply to keep out the chill of the evening. They listen to the wind. They listen to the crickets. They listen to the absolute, magnificent nothingness. And wrapped in that profound, unbroken quiet, tethered to the earth by the sudden, glowing promise of tomorrow, they finally close their eyes, resting in the sure and certain knowledge that when the sun rises, it will rise on a world that is finally, beautifully at peace. The tracks that carry a man back to the world do not roar, they hum a slow, rhythmic lullaby of steel and time. For years, the trains had only moved in one direction, carrying millions of young boys away from the warmth of their hearths and out into the vast, freezing unknown. But now, the great engines have turned around. They are pulling long, heavy lines of wooden carriages back toward the sunrise, carrying a generation of quiet, changed men back to the lives they had left behind. To sit in one of these train cars is to be suspended in a beautiful, agonizing state of disbelief. The young men sit shoulder to shoulder on the worn velvet seats, their heavy canvas bags resting at their feet. They do not talk very much. The loud, nervous bravado of the journey out has been entirely replaced by a profound, echoing silence. They just stare out the windows, resting their foreheads against the cool glass, watching the landscape tear past in a blur of greens, browns, and soft, hazy golds. Through the smudged glass, the world looks entirely surreal. They pass through quiet valleys where the grass is tall and untouched by the heavy tracks of machinery. They see farmers walking slowly behind plow horses, turning over rich, dark soil that holds no hidden dangers. They see children running through open fields, chasing a stray dog, their laughter lost in the wind but their smiles radiant and clear. For a boy who has spent the last year living in the suffocating labyrinth of a jungle or huddled in the frozen ruins of a shattered city, this ordinary world feels like an impossible dream. He watches a woman hanging clean, white laundry on a line behind a small farmhouse. The sheets billow gently in the breeze. It is such a simple, beautiful, domestic act that it makes his throat ache. He traces the shape of the window frame with his thumb, terrified that if he blinks, the farmhouse will vanish, and he will wake up shivering in the mud. Across the continent, on a different train moving through a different countryside, another young man sits by a window, experiencing the exact same, overwhelming quiet. He wears the faded, dusty uniform of the opposing side. His journey home takes him through landscapes that are deeply scarred, past the skeletal remains of cities and the shattered roofs of ancient towns. Yet, the profound feeling of disbelief is identical. He holds his breath as the train crosses a repaired stone bridge over a familiar, wide river. He recognizes the curve of the hills. He recognizes the shape of the church spire in the distance. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the small, battered tin box he has carried through the darkest nights of the world. Inside is the letter from his wife, the one he read in the freezing rain and the suffocating dark. The paper is soft, the ink smudged by his own tears and the damp earth. He does not need to read it now. He simply holds the tin in his lap, letting his hands rest on the metal, feeling the slow, rhythmic rocking of the train carriage bringing him closer to the woman who wrote those words. There is a strange, heavy weight to survival. As the miles disappear beneath the iron wheels, the young men look at their own hands. They look at the worn, coarse fabric of their coats. They are returning to the exact same towns they left, but they know, with a quiet and absolute certainty, that they are not the same boys who walked out the door. The innocence of the world they left behind is gone, replaced by a deep, enduring wisdom born of profound suffering and profound love. When the train finally hisses to a halt at the small, brick station of a hometown, the platform is not filled with cheering crowds or brass bands. It is a quiet, deeply personal arrival. A young man steps down from the metal stairs onto the familiar cobblestones. The air here smells different. It smells of damp pine needles, of coal smoke from a baker's chimney, of wet autumn leaves. It is the exact, unchangeable scent of his childhood. He adjusts the heavy canvas strap of his duffel bag over his shoulder and begins to walk. The walk down his street is a journey through a museum of his own memories. He passes the low stone wall he used to balance on when he was a boy. He passes the grand oak tree where he carved his initials. Every crack in the sidewalk, every faded painted shutter, every chipped brick is exactly where he left it. But it all feels incredibly fragile, like a delicate painting he is afraid to touch. He stops at a wooden gate. The paint is peeling, and the hinges squeak with a familiar, high-pitched groan as he pushes it open. He walks up the short path to the front door. He reaches out and rests his hand on the brass doorknob. The metal is cool and smooth. He stands there for a long moment, closing his eyes, listening to the soft, rhythmic ticking of a clock from inside the hallway. He turns the knob. The moment of reunion is not a loud, dramatic thing. It is a sudden, breathless collision of souls. A mother, wiping her hands on a dish towel, stops in the center of the kitchen. A father lowers his newspaper. And then, there is only the desperate, crushing embrace, the smell of lavender soap, the quiet, muffled tears soaking into the heavy wool of the uniformed shoulder. There are no words big enough for this moment. There is only the radiant, overwhelming truth that the front door has closed, and the storm is finally locked outside. Later that evening, when the house has settled into a deep, domestic quiet, the young man walks slowly up the stairs to his childhood bedroom. The room is exactly as he left it. The bed is neatly made, the quilt folded perfectly at the foot. His old books are lined up on the wooden shelf. A thin layer of dust dances in the pale moonlight filtering through the window. He sets his heavy canvas bag on the floor. It is time to take off the uniform. For years, this coarse, scratchy fabric has been his home, his armor, and his entire identity. It has protected him from the biting frost, it has soaked up the torrential rains of the monsoon, and it has carried the terrible, heavy dust of the volcanic ash. Unbuttoning the heavy tunic feels like shedding a second skin. He moves slowly, deliberately. He unbuckles the stiff canvas webbing, letting it fall to the wooden floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. He slips his arms out of the thick wool coat, folding it carefully, reverently, and placing it over the back of a wooden chair. He pulls off the heavy, scuffed leather boots that have walked across deserts and waded through freezing rivers. As he strips away the layers of the era, a dizzying, profound sense of physical lightness washes over him. He opens a wooden drawer and pulls out a soft, old cotton shirt that smells faintly of cedar wood and thyme. He slips it over his head. The fabric is paper-thin, incredibly soft against his skin. It feels like nothing at all. He stands in the center of the room, wearing his soft civilian clothes, looking at the heavy pile of wool and leather resting on the chair. He feels entirely untethered, floating in a sudden, strange weightlessness. He turns down the bed. The sheets are crisp, white, and perfectly clean. He slides between them, resting his head on a feather pillow that yields instantly to his weight. But sleep does not come. The bed is too soft. The room is too warm. The silence is too absolute. His body, conditioned by years of sleeping on roots, rocks, frozen earth, and the steel decks of rolling ships, does not know how to understand this profound comfort. He lies staring at the ceiling, his heart beating a fast, anxious rhythm in the quiet dark. He listens for the sound of a sentry's footsteps. He listens for the low rumble of an engine. He listens for the wind howling through a ruined cellar. There is nothing. Only the gentle, rhythmic breathing of his parents sleeping in the room down the hall. Slowly, carefully, he slips out of the soft bed. He takes the quilt, wraps it around his shoulders, and lies down on the hard, wooden floorboards next to the window. The solid, unyielding pressure of the floor against his back is instantly familiar. It grounds him. It makes sense to his tired bones. He pulls his knees up slightly, resting his head on his arm, and watches the moonlight shift across the room. He will learn to sleep in the soft bed eventually. But for tonight, the floor is a gentle, necessary bridge between the world he survived and the world he has returned to. As he lies there in the silver light, the quiet grief begins to settle in. It does not come as a crashing wave, but as a slow, deep ache in the center of his chest. He thinks of the boys who rode the train out with him, the boys who shared his meager rations, the boys who whispered their fears in the dark. He thinks of the friend who gave him the last sip of water from a metal canteen. He thinks of the boy who sang a Christmas carol in the freezing woods. He knows that in houses all across the world, on both sides of the broken map, there are beds that will not be slept in tonight. There are front doors that will not open. There are empty chairs sitting quietly at kitchen tables, waiting for boys who have become a permanent part of the earth. He traces the grain of the wooden floorboard with his finger. A silent, hot tear slips down his cheek, falling into the shadows. It is a tear of profound survivor's guilt, a heavy, unspoken sorrow that he knows he will carry for the rest of his life. He closes his eyes and whispers their names into the empty room. He builds a small, quiet monument to them in his heart, a place where they will always remain young, always remain brave, and always remain his brothers. He makes a silent promise to the ghosts in the room. I will breathe the clean air for you. I will walk in the sun for you. I will live a quiet, beautiful life, because you cannot. It is this promise that finally brings him peace. The heavy, frantic energy of survival begins to slowly drain away into the floorboards. The moonlight fades as the night deepens, wrapping the house in a soft, forgiving dark. When the morning comes, it does not arrive with the harsh, jarring blast of a siren. It arrives as a slow, golden warming of the air. A single bird begins to sing in the oak tree outside the window. The smell of roasting coffee and toasting bread drifts gently up the stairs, a sweet, domestic incense. The young man opens his eyes. He is still lying on the floor, wrapped in the quilt. He takes a long, slow breath. The air is entirely still. He unwraps the blanket, stands up, and walks over to the window. He looks out over the quiet street. The world is awake. The baker is sweeping his steps. A neighbor is walking a dog. The dew is glittering on the green grass of the front lawns. The war is over. The long, terrible night has finally ended. He turns away from the window, leaves the heavy wool uniform resting silently on the chair, and walks out into the hallway. He walks slowly down the stairs, his bare feet making no sound on the wood, moving toward the warmth of the kitchen and the sound of his mother's voice. The long road forward is vast and completely unwritten, but it begins right here, with a simple, quiet step into the morning light. Time does not extinguish the past, it simply softens the sharpest edges, turning the roaring fires of youth into the quiet, glowing embers of an autumn evening. If you were to walk into the quiet, sunlit parlor of an old house today, you would find a silence that is entirely different from the heavy, breathless quiet of the battlefield. This is a profound, earned peace. It is the sound of a grandfather clock ticking slowly in the hallway, the gentle clinking of a silver spoon against a porcelain teacup, and the soft, rhythmic creak of a worn wooden rocking chair. Sitting in that chair is an old man. His hair is the color of spun silver, thinning and soft. His shoulders, which once carried the unbearable, heavy canvas packs of a world at war, are stooped now, resting gently against the knitted afghan draped over the back of his seat. If you look closely at his hands, resting quietly in his lap, you will see the map of an entire century. The skin is thin, translucent as old parchment, mapping a delicate network of pale blue veins and dark, scattered sunspots. These hands tremble slightly when he lifts his teacup. It is hard to believe, looking at their fragile, gentle grace, that these are the exact same hands that dug freezing trenches in the winter, that gripped the cold steel of a rifle, that pulled a stranger from the churning waters of a dark ocean. They are the hands of a soldier, yes. But they are also the hands that later built a wooden crib for his firstborn child. They are the hands that planted a garden of white roses in the spring, that gently wiped the tears from his granddaughter's face, and that held the hand of his wife as she peacefully slipped away into the dark. The war was only a few terrible years of his youth. The rest of his life was a long, beautiful testament to healing. As the afternoon sun slants through the window panes, casting long, golden rectangles of light across the floral rug, he closes his eyes. When he was a young man, newly returned from the edge of the world, the memories were sharp and terrifying. The loud, sudden noises of the city would make his heart race. The nightmares would come in the dark, bringing back the smell of the damp earth, the biting cold of the snow, and the blinding flash of the sky. But time is a gentle, forgiving river. As the decades passed, the rushing water slowly tumbled the jagged stones of his memory, wearing them down until they were smooth and round and safe to hold. The roaring noise of the era has completely faded away. He no longer hears the engines, or the sirens, or the crashing of the waves against the steel. When he closes his eyes now, he hears only the gentle things. He hears the soft, whispered lullaby of the boy from the bakery singing in the frozen woods. He hears the gentle patter of the monsoon rain washing the dust from his hands. He hears the breathtaking, absolute silence of the very first morning of peace. He opens his eyes and reaches toward a small wooden table beside his chair. Resting there is a carved cedar box. It smells of dry wood and old paper. He opens the brass latch with a quiet click. Inside are the artifacts of his survival. They are not medals of bronze or silver. They are far more precious than that. There is the small, pale blue piece of sea glass, worn smooth by the ocean. There is the pressed daisy, its petals now brown and paper-thin, resting inside the cover of a small leather book. There is a photograph of his mother, her edges frayed from being held 1,000 times in the dark. He touches them lightly, one by one. The grief he used to feel when looking at these objects, the sharp, piercing sorrow for the boys who did not come home, has changed. It is no longer a heavy, crushing weight that steals his breath. It has become a quiet, familiar companion. It is a soft ache, like a stiff joint on a rainy morning, a permanent, gentle reminder of the price of the quiet room he sits in today. He smiles down at the box, whispering a silent, loving greeting to the ghosts of his youth. They have not aged a single day. They are still boys, frozen in the amber of his heart, forever 19, forever brave, and forever his brothers. Thousands of miles away, on the other side of the vast, quiet oceans, the sun is just beginning to rise on a different house, in a different country. Here, an old man shuffles slowly out onto his wooden porch, wrapping a thick, quilted robe tightly around his fragile shoulders. He steps into the cool morning air, breathing in the scent of damp soil and blooming cherry blossoms. He leans against the wooden railing, watching the mist slowly burn off the distant hills. In the pocket of his robe is a small, folded piece of white silk, dotted with faded red knots. He rests his hand over it. He does not know the old man sitting in the rocking chair across the world, but their souls are perfectly, inextricably bound together. They are the last, fading embers of the same great fire. If they were to meet today, walking slowly down a quiet park path with their wooden canes, they would not see the uniforms of their youth. They would not see the flags that once divided the earth. They would look into each other's faded, watery eyes, and they would see a mirror. They would recognize the shared, heavy wisdom of outliving their generation. They would recognize the quiet gratitude for the warmth of the sun on their faces. They would sit together on a wooden bench, watching the birds flutter in the grass, and they would not need to speak a single word. The profound, silent fraternity of their shared suffering would be enough. In the fading light of their lives, the concept of the enemy has completely dissolved, washed away by the immense, humbling scale of a long human life. The old man on the porch looks at the rising sun, and he forgives the boys who stood on the other side of the smoke. He forgives them for their fear, for their duty, and for the terrible things the world asked them to do. And, in a quiet, deeply private corner of his heart, he finally forgives himself for surviving. He realizes now that the greatest victory of his life was not a line drawn on a map or a treaty signed on a desk. The greatest victory was returning home and choosing to love the world again. It was choosing to build instead of destroy. It was teaching his children how to be gentle, how to listen to the rain, and how to hold a fragile piece of paper with reverence. The true legacy of their generation is not the machinery they left rusting in the forests, or the concrete bunkers slowly sinking into the sand. Their legacy is the profound, beautiful quiet that they bought with their youth. It is the simple, breathtaking fact that a child can run across a green pasture in Normandy without fear. It is the knowledge that a family can sleep soundly through a winter night without listening for the wail of a siren. As the evening finally approaches for the old man in the rocking chair, the shadows lengthen across his parlor floor. The golden light turns to a deep, bruised purple, and then to a soft, comforting twilight. He closes the cedar box, letting the brass latch fall into place. He leans his head back against the Afghan. His eyes are heavy now. The house is completely still, save for the ticking of the clock. He thinks of the vast, beautiful world outside his window. He thinks of the mountains, the deep, rushing oceans, the ancient forests, and the vast, sweeping plains. It is a good world. It is a world that has healed its scars, just as his own hands have healed theirs. The earth has absorbed the iron, and the ash, and the sorrow, and it has grown green grass over it all. He feels a profound, absolute sense of completion. He has carried the memories for a very long time, keeping them safe, making sure the boys who fell in the dark were not forgotten. But he is tired now. The torch has been passed to the children, and to the children of the children. It is their time to walk in the sun. It is their time to guard the peace. He wraps his worn, knitted blanket a little tighter around his shoulders. He lets out a long, slow, trembling breath, a sound like a gentle breeze rustling through autumn leaves. The old man closes his eyes one final time. In the peaceful, gathering dark of his mind, he is no longer frail. He is young again, walking down a dirt road toward a farmhouse with a green door. The sky above him is a brilliant, unbroken blue. There is no noise. There is only the sweet smell of the harvest, the warm sun on his face, and the voices of his family calling him home from the fields. And as the quiet night wraps its gentle arms around the sleeping house, the last, glowing ember finally, beautifully, and peacefully fades into the dark, leaving behind nothing but the warmth of its memory, and a world completely, miraculously at rest.